There are sounds in the earth that no one is supposed to hear. Kendall sits in the Judith Mountains of central Montana, 80 miles from anywhere that matters. It was a gold mining town once, briefly prosperous between 1898 and 1912. At its peak, the population reached 2,000. By 1922, when the North Moccasin mine flooded and the company abandoned operations, fewer than 50 people remained. The post office closed in 1933. The last permanent resident left sometime in the 1950s, though no record exists of exactly when. The town that remains is barely a town at all. Weathered timber frames lean against hillsides. Rusted equipment rests where it was dropped decades ago. The mine entrances were sealed with concrete and steel in 1923, part of a statewide initiative to prevent accidents and contamination. According to Montana Bureau of Mines records, all shafts were inspected and verified closed. No access remains to the tunnels below. The land itself is unremarkable. Ponderosa pine and Douglas fir cover the lower elevations. Above the tree line, exposed granite forms ridges that overlook the Lewis and Clark National Forest. The elevation sits at roughly 6,000 feet. Winter comes early and stays late. Cell service is non-existent. The nearest paved road is 14 miles away. It's the kind of place people forget exists until something happens that can't be forgotten. On the night of September 14, 1983, Marcus Duvall was working the overnight shift at a Forest Service relay station 9 miles southwest of Kendall. His job involved monitoring emergency frequencies and maintaining radio equipment that connected fire lookouts across the region. The station was small, automated mostly, requiring only routine checks and occasional repairs. At 2:17 in the morning, Duvall noted interference on the VHF band. It wasn't unusual. Atmospheric conditions, distant broadcasts, equipment malfunction. He logged it and continued his rounds. 47 minutes later, the interference returned. Same frequency, same duration, approximately 90 seconds. He recorded it this time. When he played back the recording, he heard what he would later describe as mechanical rhythm. Not static. Not natural interference. A repetitive pattern of low thumps, metallic scraping, and what might have been hydraulic pressure release. It sounded, he told his supervisor the next morning, like mining equipment running deep underground. His supervisor dismissed it. Duvall let it go, but the signal repeated, every 47 minutes, every night, for 3 weeks. He recorded dozens of instances. He triangulated the source using directional equipment. The signal originated from a point approximately 1 mile north of the sealed North Moccasin mine. On October 8, 1983, he filed a formal report with the Federal Communications Commission. The FCC acknowledged receipt, but took no action. On October 23rd, 2 technicians from Malmstrom Air Force Base arrived unannounced at the relay station, spent 6 hours examining his equipment, and left without explanation. The next week, Duvall received a transfer to a station in Idaho. He accepted. Before leaving Montana, he made copies of every recording. Janet Sorensen worked as a field geologist for the Montana Bureau of Mines in the early 1990s. Her doctoral research focused on subsidence patterns in abandoned mining districts. Kendall was on her survey list. In July of 1992, she spent 4 days conducting ground-penetrating radar scans around the sealed mine entrances. Her equipment detected anomalies, not voids exactly, but density variations that suggested movement below the survey depth. When she mentioned this to her department supervisor, he told her the equipment was likely picking up groundwater or mineral deposits. She didn't argue, but she returned to Kendall alone 2 weeks later with a seismometer. She placed the instrument 300 feet from the main shaft entrance and left it recording for 72 hours. When she retrieved the data, she found a repeating seismic signature, low magnitude, regular interval, 47 minutes apart. It matched no known geological process. Earthquakes don't keep time. Neither does settling rock or moving water. She submitted her findings as an appendix to her dissertation. Her advisor suggested removing it. The data was interesting, he said, but it distracted from her primary research and invited speculation. She complied. The appendix exists only in her personal files. In a phone interview conducted in 2009, she described the seismic pattern as deeply unusual. It's not tectonic, she said. It's not thermal expansion or groundwater. If I had to categorize it, I'd say it resembles machinery. But there's nothing down there. The mines have been sealed for 80 years. She paused for several seconds. I had dreams about it afterward, she said, for maybe 2 months. Same dream every time. I'm standing at the entrance to a mine shaft I've never seen, and there's air coming out, warm air, like something down there is breathing. Between 1983 and 2015, at least 17 individuals documented the Kendall signal. Most were amateur radio operators, hikers with shortwave receivers, or researchers passing through the area. Their reports varied slightly in detail, but shared consistent elements: the 47-minute interval, the mechanical quality of the sound, and the apparent source location near the sealed mines. In 2003, a team from the University of Montana's physics department attempted to record the signal using modern digital equipment. They succeeded. The recording revealed additional layers, faint harmonic frequencies beneath the primary sound, creating what one researcher described as almost a melody if machinery could sing. None of them filed formal reports. The data was discussed in a departmental meeting, then archived. When asked why the research wasn't published, the lead investigator, Dr. Raymond Ochoa, said it would have required claims they couldn't substantiate. We recorded something, he said. We don't know what it is. Publishing that invites mockery, or worse, demands for explanations we don't have. He did mention one detail off the record. 3 members of the research team, over the course of the following month, independently reported the same dream. Standing at an unfamiliar mine entrance, feeling compelled to enter, waking before they stepped inside. In 2007, the Bureau of Land Management conducted a safety inspection of Kendall's sealed mines. The concrete seals showed no signs of compromise. No openings existed. The inspection report concluded that all shafts remained secure and posed no public risk. The report made no mention of the signal. In 2012, a Freedom of Information Act request filed by a Montana journalist sought all federal records related to Kendall's mines. The request returned heavily redacted documents. Several pages were withheld entirely under exemptions related to national security and ongoing investigations. What investigations and why they involved a ghost town abandoned 90 years prior was not explained. Malmstrom Air Force Base, when contacted, stated they had no record of personnel visiting the Forest Service relay station in 1983. Marcus Duval's transfer records were classified as routine reassignment. The base declined further comment. The FCC maintains no file on Duval's original report. The signal can still be recorded. It requires patience, functional radio equipment, and proximity to Kendall. The interval remains precise, 47 minutes. The sound is unchanged, low, rhythmic, mechanical. No variation in 30 years. Those who record it long enough begin to notice other things, small things. The way the sound seems to move, not in space but in depth, as though descending through layers of rock. The faint suggestion of voices beneath the machinery, too distorted to distinguish words, but unmistakably human in cadence. And the dreams. Not everyone experiences them, but enough do that the pattern is clear. They stand at a mine entrance they don't recognize. The air smells of copper and earth. They know, without being told, that something below is waiting for them to descend. They never do, because they wake before the choice is made. No theory adequately explains the Kendall frequency. Equipment malfunction fails to account for its consistency across decades and recording devices. Geological phenomena don't maintain such precise intervals. Human activity requires humans, and Kendall has been empty for 70 years. The mines remain sealed. The signal continues. Every 47 minutes, something below the town runs its cycle, faithful as a clock, patient as stone. And somewhere in Montana, someone is always listening. There are places where nature refuses to speak. Pony sits in Madison County, Montana, approximately 50 miles southeast of Butte. It was founded in 1868 during a minor gold rush that attracted several hundred prospectors and their families. By 1875, the easily accessible ore was exhausted. The population declined steadily. A brief resurgence occurred in the early 1900s when new mining techniques made deeper extraction profitable, but by 1940, the town was effectively abandoned. Today, perhaps a dozen structures remain standing. Most are privately owned, used as seasonal cabins or storage. No one lives there year-round. The surrounding landscape is typical of southwestern Montana. The Tobacco Root Mountains rise to the east. Willow Creek runs through a shallow valley to the north. The terrain consists of mixed forest, lodgepole pine, Douglas fir, and aspen, interspersed with open meadows. Elevation ranges from 6,000 to 7,000 feet. Deer, elk, black bears, and mountain lions inhabit the region. It's good hunting country. People have been coming here for that purpose for over a century. In 1970, the U.S. Forest Service updated their management maps for the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest, which includes the land surrounding Pony. The update incorporated new surveying technology and ecological assessments. One notation appeared on these maps that had never been documented before: a shaded area forming a nearly perfect square, 9 miles on each side, centered on the town itself. The notation read, "Wildlife activity, minimal, seasonal survey recommended." No explanation was provided for why this particular area showed minimal activity or what made it distinct from the surrounding forest. Thomas Bergstrom was a wildlife biologist working for Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks in the early 1970s. His work focused on elk population management and migration patterns. In the summer of 1972, he conducted a routine survey along the western edge of the Tobacco Root Range, which included sections of the forest near Pony. He placed 12 audio recording devices in a grid pattern across a 20-square-mile area. The devices were motion-activated, designed to capture animal vocalizations for species identification and behavioral study. He left them in place for 30 days. When he retrieved the recordings, 11 devices had captured expected results: elk bugling, bird songs, coyote calls, wind through trees, the occasional sound of deer moving through underbrush. One device, placed approximately 2 miles southwest of Pony, had recorded nothing. 30 days of silence. Bergstrom assumed equipment failure. He replaced the device and returned a month later. The second recording yielded the same result: complete silence, except for one sound, a rhythmic tapping, faint but consistent, occurring at irregular intervals throughout the recording. He couldn't identify it. Over the next year, he placed recording equipment at various points around Pony. He discovered a boundary. Inside an area roughly 9 miles square, his equipment recorded almost no wildlife sounds. Outside that boundary, normal activity resumed. The transition was sharp, sometimes occurring within 100 feet. He documented his findings in a report submitted to his department in December of 1973. The report noted the anomaly, speculated about possible causes, soil composition, electromagnetic interference, disease affecting local fauna, and recommended further investigation. No further investigation was authorized. When asked about it years later, Bergstrom said his supervisor had read the report and called it interesting but not a priority. The file was archived. In a 2011 interview, Bergstrom described returning to Pony on his own time in 1974. "I wanted to understand what I was hearing," he said, "or not hearing. I hiked in during early morning, prime time for bird activity. I crossed into the zone, and it was like someone turned off a switch. Just quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Wrong quiet." He paused. "I stayed maybe 20 minutes. There was that tapping sound again. I followed it for a while, but couldn't locate a source. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I left. I didn't go back." Local hunters have known about the silence for longer than any official documentation acknowledges. Interviews conducted with residents of nearby Harrison and Virginia City reveal a consistent pattern of avoidance. Raymond Hollister, who guided hunting trips in the region from 1965 through the early 2000s, described the area around Pony as bad ground. When pressed for details, he said, "You take clients in there, they notice. Animals notice too. Elk trails just stop at the edge, like they hit a wall. Dogs won't track past it. Had a hound once, best tracker I ever owned, just sat down and whined when I tried to lead him in. Never seen anything like it." Margaret Ferris grew up in Virginia City, 20 miles from Pony. Her family owned property near the boundary of what she called the quiet zone. She remembers her father forbidding her and her siblings from playing in that section of their land. "He said it wasn't safe," she recalled. "Not because of animals or terrain. He just said it wasn't right. He'd hunted all over Montana, and that place bothered him." She mentioned one other detail. Sometimes at night, if the wind was right, you could hear tapping, like someone knocking on wood, very far away. "My father said it was woodpeckers, but it happened in winter too." In 1996, a research team from the University of Montana's Biological Sciences Department conducted an audio survey of the region as part of a broader study on acoustic ecology in forested environments. Graduate student Luis Navarro led the fieldwork. The team placed recording equipment at 30 locations throughout Madison and Beaverhead counties. The goal was to create an acoustic map of the area, documenting species diversity through sound. Navarro's equipment captured the silence. Multiple recording stations placed within the grid around Pony showed drastically reduced acoustic activity compared to surrounding areas. His report noted the anomaly and attempted to offer explanations. Perhaps the area had experienced a recent wildfire, or disease had reduced populations, or human activity had driven animals away. None of these explanations matched the evidence. No fire had occurred in that area for decades. No disease outbreaks were documented. Human activity around Pony was minimal and had been for years. The tapping appeared on several of Navarro's recordings. He classified it as unknown origin, possibly geological. When he played the recordings for colleagues, they suggested everything from woodpeckers to settling tree limbs to distant construction. None of these theories fit the pattern or consistency of the sound. Navarro submitted his findings as part of his thesis in 1998. The section discussing Pony comprised 3 pages of a 200-page document. It was noted, archived, and forgotten. In a 2014 email exchange, Navarro admitted the experience had stayed with him. "I went into the grid alone once," when he wrote. "Just wanted to experience it firsthand. It's difficult to describe. You don't realize how much ambient sound you rely on until it's gone. No birds, no insects, no rustling. Just wind and that tapping. I lasted maybe 30 minutes before the silence started feeling oppressive, like the forest was holding its breath." Attempts to study the phenomenon officially have been limited. The U.S. Geological Survey has no record of seismic, electromagnetic, or geological anomalies in the area. The Forest Service acknowledges the reduced wildlife activity, but attributes it to localized environmental factors without specifying what those factors are. In 2008, a request was filed to conduct a comprehensive ecological study of the grid. The request, submitted by a coalition of independent researchers, proposed deploying modern acoustic monitoring equipment, conducting soil and air quality tests, and comparing current conditions to historical data. The request was denied. The official reason given was budgetary constraints and competing priorities. No alternative funding was suggested. Forestry maps still show the notation. Wildlife activity remains minimal. The boundary persists, unchanged in over 50 years. Birds do not sing there. Elk do not call. Predators do not howl. The silence holds, year after year, as if the land itself has chosen not to participate in the noise of living. And beneath the silence, always, the tapping continues. Irregular, patient, purposeful. No one has ever found its source. No theory adequately explains it. It simply is, like the silence that surrounds it. A rhythm without origin, keeping time in a place where time feels suspended. Hunters still avoid the grid after dark. Those who enter during the day rarely stay long. They describe the same feeling, a pressure, a wrongness, the sense that something is listening to them in a place where nothing should be able to hear. The forest records show no explanation. The silence remains unbroken. And every year, without fail, someone records the tapping again. Some stories end before they're finished. Comet sits in Jefferson County, Montana, roughly 30 miles south of Helena. It began as a mining camp in 1893 when silver deposits were discovered in the Boulder River Valley. By 1895, it had grown into a legitimate town with a post office, general store, several saloons, and a one-room schoolhouse. The population peaked at around 300 residents in 1902. When the mines began to fail in the 1920s, people started leaving. The post office closed in 1942. By 1950, Comet was empty. The town occupies a narrow valley flanked by dense pine forest. The elevation sits at approximately 5,800 feet. Winters are harsh, summers are brief. The schoolhouse, built in 1897, stands near what was once the town center. It's a simple timber structure, 20 feet by 30 feet, with a collapsed roof and walls weathered gray by exposure. Most windows are broken. The door hangs at an angle from one hinge. The building is not particularly remarkable. Dozens of similar structures exist throughout Montana, relics of boom and bust cycles that defined the region's history. Comet's schoolhouse would likely have been forgotten entirely if not for what was found inside in 2003. Dr. Patricia Whitmore was a historian specializing in frontier education systems. Her doctoral research focused on rural schoolhouses in the Mountain West. In May of 2003, she visited Comet as part of a broader survey documenting surviving educational structures across Montana. The schoolhouse interior was in poor condition. Rain had damaged much of the structure. Rodents had nested in the walls. But against the back wall, inside a wooden cabinet that had somehow remained relatively dry, Whitmore found a collection of student journals. There were 214 of them. Each was a standard composition book, the kind used in schools throughout the early 20th century. They were organized chronologically, spanning from September 1918 to March 1937. Names were written on the covers in children's handwriting. Most entries were mundane, descriptions of daily life, arithmetic problems, spelling practice, occasional drawings. What made them unusual was how they ended. Every single journal stopped mid-sentence, not at the end of a page or the end of a school year, mid-sentence. and in every case the final words were identical: "The air tastes wrong." The sentences varied in context. One student was describing a walk to school. Another was writing about helping with chores. A third was recounting a story told by an older sibling. But all of them terminated with those 4 words, written in the same careful script that characterized the rest of their entries, showing no signs of distress or urgency. Whitmore photographed every journal. She noted the dates of the final entries. They ranged across the entire 19-year span. Some journals ended in 1918. Others continued until 1937. The final entry date for each student appeared random, with no obvious pattern linking them. She also noted the names: 214 students. She cross-referenced them against available census data, school records, and county archives. She could not find graduation records for any of them. No evidence existed that they had completed their education in Comet or transferred to schools elsewhere. No death certificates matched their names and approximate ages. They simply disappeared from documentation. In a 2004 interview, Whitmore described her initial reaction as confusion rather than alarm. "Educational records from that era are notoriously incomplete," she said. "Rural areas often had gaps in documentation, but this was different. It wasn't just that records were missing, it's that there were no records at all, not even fragments." She published her findings in a regional history journal in 2005. The article was titled "Incomplete Narratives: Frontier Education and Archival Gaps in Jefferson County, Montana." It presented the journals as an example of how historical documentation could be lost or destroyed, leaving only fragments of individual lives behind. The article attracted little attention outside academic circles, but it reached several people who had family connections to Comet. Eleanor Voss contacted Whitmore in 2006. Her grandmother, Ruth Magnuson, had lived in Comet until 1938. Ruth was still alive, 94 years old, living in a care facility in Bozeman. Voss said her grandmother had stories about the town that she'd never fully explained. Whitmore visited Ruth Magnuson in July of 2006. Magnuson's memory was inconsistent, but she was lucid enough to discuss her childhood. She remembered Comet clearly. She remembered the schoolhouse, the teacher, a woman named Miss Harrington, and several of the children she'd attended school with. When Whitmore showed her the list of names from the journals, Magnuson recognized 16 of them. "They left," she said, "just stopped coming to school one day. Parents said they'd moved away, gone to relatives in other towns. It happened all the time back then." But she hesitated when Whitmore asked if she remembered anything unusual about those departures. "There was something," Magnuson said. "People talked, but they didn't talk openly, if that makes sense. It was like everyone knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to say it directly. I remember my mother telling me not to go near the old mill on the east side of town. She never said why, just that it wasn't safe." When asked about the phrase, "the air tastes wrong," Magnuson went quiet. After a long pause, she said, "That's what the kids said. I remember that now, right before they stopped coming. They'd say the air tasted wrong, like metal or something burnt, and then they'd be gone." Whitmore asked if Magnuson had ever experienced that sensation. Magnuson nodded slowly. "Once," she said, "walking home from school in the winter, 1937, I think. The air tasted wrong. I told my father. He looked at me for a long time, then said we were leaving Comet. We moved to Helena 2 weeks later." Another witness emerged in 2008. Franklin Driscoll, a retired geologist who had worked for the Montana Bureau of Mines in the 1960s, reached out to Whitmore after reading her article online. He said he'd surveyed the Comet area in 1964 as part of a statewide mineral assessment project. In an email exchange, Driscoll described encountering something unusual near the abandoned mill site east of town. "We were taking soil samples," he wrote. "Standard procedure, but the readings were off. Not dangerously so, just inconsistent with surrounding areas. Elevated traces of compounds that didn't match known deposits. My supervisor said it was probably contamination from old mining operations, but the patterns didn't fit that explanation." He mentioned one other detail. "I spent 3 days in that area. Every afternoon around 2 or 3 o'clock, I'd notice this taste in my mouth. Metallic, slightly bitter. I assumed it was dehydration or something I ate. But it only happened there, and only at that time of day. When I left, it stopped." Whitmore attempted to investigate further. She filed requests for historical records related to Comet from the Jefferson County Clerk's Office, the Montana Historical Society, and the Bureau of Land Management. She received minimal information in return. The county clerk's office provided basic property records showing ownership transfers from the 1890s through the 1940s. Nothing unusual appeared in these documents. The Montana Historical Society had limited material on Comet. A few photographs from the early 1900s. Brief mentions in mining reports. No census data for 1938, which should have existed but was listed as lost or destroyed. The Bureau of Land Management had records of land sales and transfers, but nothing indicating why the population declined so dramatically in 1938. When Whitmore requested environmental assessment data for the area, she was told no assessments had been conducted. She contacted the Centers for Disease Control to inquire about historical disease outbreaks in Jefferson County during the relevant period. No outbreaks were documented. She searched newspaper archives from Helena and Butte, looking for reports of unusual deaths, missing persons, or community concerns related to Comet. She found nothing. In 2009, Whitmore returned to Comet with a colleague, Dr. Howard Tan, an environmental scientist. They conducted soil and air quality tests around the town site, focusing on the area near the old mill. The tests showed elevated but not dangerous levels of heavy metals, lead, arsenic, mercury, consistent with historical mining activity. Nothing that would explain sudden population loss or unusual symptoms. They also found no evidence of the old mill. Property records indicated it had existed, but no foundation remained. No debris. The location where it should have stood was simply empty ground, overgrown with vegetation. Whitmore published a follow-up article in 2011 titled, "The Vanishing of Comet, Archival Absence and Historical Erasure in 20th Century Montana." It posed more questions than it answered. She concluded with a statement that remains difficult to dispute. 214 children wrote the same final sentence in their journals across a span of 19 years. None of them left verifiable records of what happened next. This is not a gap in documentation. This is a pattern of absence. The journals remain in storage at the Montana Historical Society. They are available for research by appointment. Few people request to see them. The schoolhouse in Comet is slowly collapsing. Each winter, more of the roof caves in. Eventually, the structure will be gone entirely, reclaimed by the forest that surrounds it. But the question remains, quiet and unanswered. What did those children taste? What did it mean? And where did they go after they stopped writing? The air in Comet tastes like nothing now, just cold and pine and distance. But sometimes, if you stand in the right place at the right time, there's something else underneath. Something faint and metallic that lingers on the tongue for just a moment before fading. And if you notice it, locals will tell you to leave, not because they know what it is, but because they know what happens to those who stay long enough to ask. Some images appear in places they were never captured. Castle is located in Mayhew County, Montana, approximately 40 miles northwest of White Sulphur Springs. It was established in 1887 after silver ore was discovered in the Castle Mountains. By 1892, the population had reached nearly 2,000. The town had electricity, running water, a hospital, several hotels, and a red light district. The mines produced millions of dollars in silver before the ore bodies depleted in the early 1900s. By 1930, Castle was abandoned. What remains today is scattered across a steep hillside at approximately 6,000 feet elevation. A few structures still stand: the company office, portions of the smelter, several cabin foundations. The mine entrances are visible but sealed. According to Montana Bureau of Mines records, all mining operations at Castle involved horizontal drift tunnels following silver veins through the mountainside. No vertical shafts were ever excavated. The geology didn't require them, and the expense couldn't be justified. The town is accessible by a rough dirt road that becomes impassable in winter. It attracts occasional visitors, historians, photographers, ghost town enthusiasts. Most stay less than an hour. The site is isolated, windswept, and offers little shelter. There are no facilities, no cell service, and no official presence of any kind. In June of 1995, a photography student named Michael Strand visited Castle as part of a project documenting Montana ghost towns. He used a 35mm film camera, shot approximately 40 images, and had them developed at a commercial lab in Bozeman. When he reviewed the prints, he noticed something odd. In every photograph, regardless of subject or composition, a thin, dark vertical line appeared in the exact center of the frame. It was subtle, easy to dismiss as a processing error or a hair on the negative. He mentioned it to the lab technician, who examined the negatives and confirmed the line was present on the film itself, not added during development. Strand assumed his camera had malfunctioned. He borrowed a different camera and returned to Castle 2 weeks later. He shot another roll of film. The same line appeared in every image. He kept the photographs but didn't think much about it beyond noting the equipment problem in his project documentation. The photographs were filed away and forgotten. In 2001, a digital photography forum discussion mentioned Castle as a location with unusual photographic properties. Several users reported experiencing similar issues: a vertical artifact appearing in digital images taken at the site. The discussion included sample images. The line was present in all of them, always in the exact center, always the same width and darkness. One user, posting under the name Ghost Town Doc, had enhanced one of the images when the dark line was isolated and magnified. It revealed internal structure, what appeared to be layered rock strata, support timbers, and a circular opening at the bottom. It looked like a cross-section of a vertical mine shaft, viewed from an impossible angle, as if the camera had captured a slice through the earth itself. The post attracted attention from photographers and amateur researchers. Several people visited Castle to test the phenomenon. All confirmed it. The line appeared in every photograph taken within the townsite boundaries, regardless of camera type, settings, or lighting conditions. Film cameras, digital cameras, even smartphone cameras produced the same result. By 2005, the phenomenon was well documented among ghost town photography communities. No one had an explanation. Teresa Volkman was a photography professor at Montana State University. She first heard about Castle in 2007 from a student who had visited the site. Intrigued, she organized a field trip with several students and colleagues in August of that year. They brought multiple cameras, analog, digital, various formats, and manufacturers. They shot in different directions at different times of day using different exposures and focal lengths. They documented everything: weather conditions, exact locations, equipment specifications. The results were consistent. Every image contained the vertical line. When enhanced, the internal structure was visible: rock layers, timber supports, and what appeared to be a shaft extending downward to a depth that couldn't be determined from the images alone. Volkman contacted the Montana Bureau of Mines. She provided samples of the photographs and asked if any vertical shafts had been excavated at Castle that might not be documented in official records. The Bureau's mining engineer, Daniel Kowalski, reviewed the images and the historical records. He confirmed that no vertical shafts existed at Castle. The geology and mining methods used there made vertical excavation unnecessary and impractical. Volkmann then consulted with colleagues in physics and optics. They proposed several theories: lens artifacts, digital sensor anomalies, environmental conditions causing light refraction, geological features creating visual distortions. None of these theories adequately explained why the artifact was identical across all camera types and why it only appeared at this specific location. In a 2008 interview, Volkmann described her confusion. "It's not a question of whether it's real," she said. "The line is there, in every photograph, captured by every camera. The question is what we're actually seeing. Is it a flaw in how cameras interpret light at this location? Is it some kind of electromagnetic interference affecting sensors and film equally? Or is it something else entirely?" She paused before adding, "The most disturbing part is the consistency. It's not random. It's precise, centered, identical. That suggests intention, or at least pattern. But cameras don't create patterns without cause." Additional witnesses came forward over the years. Jake Morrison, a surveyor who worked in the Castle area in 2009, reported that his GPS equipment malfunctioned within the town boundaries. Elevation readings fluctuated wildly, sometimes showing depths several hundred feet below ground level, despite being on the surface. Linda Pacheco, a geologist who visited Castle in 2012, brought ground-penetrating radar equipment to investigate whether any subsurface voids existed that might explain the photographic anomaly. Her scans showed standard geology, solid rock, and soil profiles consistent with the surrounding area. No voids, no cavities, no vertical shafts. But her equipment recorded unusual electromagnetic readings she couldn't explain. "It was like there was interference coming from below," she said. "But there's nothing down there, just bedrock." An independent researcher named Roger Tillman spent considerable time documenting the phenomenon between 2010 and 2015. He compiled over 300 photographs from different sources, all showing the same vertical line. He measured its exact position, width, and darkness levels across the samples. The consistency was absolute, pixel-perfect alignment in digital images within measurement error for film photographs. Tillman also discovered something else. When he arranged the photographs chronologically and compared the enhanced cross-sections, he noticed subtle changes. The timber supports appeared to shift slightly. The rock layers showed minor variations in position. It was as if the shaft, or whatever was being captured, was slowly changing over time. He documented this in a self-published report in 2016. The report was largely ignored by academic circles, but circulated among online communities interested in unexplained phenomena. Attempts to investigate formally have met with limited success. The Montana Historical Society has no record of vertical shaft construction at Castle. The U.S. Geological Survey shows no subsurface anomalies in the area. The Bureau of Land Management, which oversees the site, has declined requests to conduct excavation or intensive study, citing budget constraints and lack of compelling evidence. In 2019, a photography equipment manufacturer sent a team to Castle to investigate whether the phenomenon was caused by a common defect across camera models. They brought pre-release equipment, controlled testing protocols, and multiple technical experts. The line appeared in every test image. The manufacturer's report, marked as internal only, was never publicly released. When contacted, a company spokesperson said the findings were inconclusive and required further study that was not currently planned. The photographs continue. Visitors still come to Castle, still take pictures, still capture the same vertical line in the exact center of every frame. Online forums share new examples regularly. The enhanced cross-sections still show the impossible shaft, always centered, always consistent. No theory has gained consensus. Equipment malfunction doesn't explain the cross-platform consistency. Environmental factors don't explain the specific location and precise centering. Geological features don't explain why the phenomenon only affects cameras and why it reveals internal structures that don't exist. The mines at Castle were horizontal. The records are clear. No vertical shafts were dug. Yet every photograph suggests otherwise, suggests that beneath the abandoned town, something descends straight down into the earth, captured only by cameras, visible only through digital sensors and chemical emulsions, existing in images but nowhere else. Those who visit Castle now often take a photograph as proof they were there. When they review the image later, they see the line. They see what it contains when enhanced. And they're left with the same question that has no answer. If the shaft doesn't exist, what are the cameras seeing? The wind moves through Castle's ruins the same as it always has. The mountains rise and fall with indifferent permanence. And the photographs keep coming, each one a perfect replica of the last, each one showing something that shouldn't be there, centered exactly where a vertical shaft would be if one had ever been dug. But no one dug a shaft at Castle. That's in the records. That's established fact. The cameras insist otherwise. Some letters arrive before they're written. Elkhorn is located in Jefferson County, Montana, approximately 15 miles south of Helena. It was established in 1870 when silver ore was discovered in the Elkhorn Mountains. The town grew rapidly, reaching a peak population of around 2,500 by 1888. It had 2 newspapers, a fraternal lodge, numerous saloons, a schoolhouse, and a post office that operated continuously from 1872 until 1954. When the silver market collapsed in the 1890s, the population declined sharply. By the 1930s, Elkhorn was largely abandoned. The town sits at approximately 6,200 feet elevation in a narrow valley. Dense forest surrounds the remaining structures. Access is via a maintained dirt road that becomes treacherous in winter. Several buildings still stand, including Fraternity Hall and Gillian Hall, both remarkably well preserved. The old post office, a small timber structure near the town center, remained mostly intact until the early 2000s, though the interior had deteriorated significantly from weather exposure and neglect. In September of 2003, a restoration team from the Montana Heritage Preservation Commission visited Elkhorn to assess the structural integrity of the remaining buildings and determine what could be salvaged or stabilized. The team included architectural historian Nathan Russo, structural engineer Amelia Kowalski, and 2 assistants. While documenting the post office interior, Russo discovered a metal strongbox beneath collapsed shelving in what had been the postmaster's office. The box was locked and heavily rusted. Using tools from their vehicle, the team managed to open it. Inside were letters, approximately 60 of them, bundled with twine, all unopened. The envelopes were yellowed and brittle, but intact. The postmarks were visible, 1889 through 1891, all originating from Elkhorn. The stamps were authentic U.S. postal issue from that period. 2-cent stamps bearing Benjamin Franklin's image, standard for domestic mail at the time. What made them unusual were the addresses. The letters were addressed to residents of Montana towns that didn't exist in the 1880s. One was addressed to a mining superintendent in Basin, Montana, a town not incorporated until 1904. Another was addressed to a family in Nahart, which wasn't established until 1981. A third was addressed to an assay office in Rimini, founded in 1895. Russo photographed the envelopes and recorded the addresses. The team transported the strongbox to the Montana Historical Society in Helena for proper archival storage and examination. Over the following weeks, historians cross-referenced the addresses against founding dates for Montana settlements. 13 of the 60 letters were addressed to towns that demonstrably didn't exist at the time the letters were postmarked. The remaining 47 were addressed to existing communities, but to specific businesses or individuals that couldn't be verified through available records from that period. The Montana Historical Society carefully opened 6 of the letters for examination, selecting those addressed to verifiable non-existent locations. The paper and ink were consistent with 1880s production. The content was written in clear, formal script. No author was identified, and the letters contained no return address. The content was disturbingly specific. One letter, postmarked August 15, 1889, addressed to a mining company in Basin, Montana, warned about a shaft collapse that would occur in 1907. It provided details, the depth of the collapse, the number of fatalities, 11 men, and the cause, which it attributed to water seepage weakening support structures. Records show that on March 9, 1907, the Jib mine in Basin experienced a catastrophic shaft collapse. 11 miners died. The official investigation determined the cause was water infiltration that destabilized timber supports. Another letter, dated November 3, 1890, addressed to a water district official in a town called Winston, which wouldn't be established until 1998, described arsenic contamination in groundwater that would be discovered in 1932. It specified the contamination source as tailings from abandoned silver mines and noted that the contamination would render 3 wells unusable. In 1932, health officials identified arsenic contamination in groundwater near Winston, Montana. The source was traced to mining tailings. 3 wells were condemned. A third letter, postmarked July 7, 1891, addressed to a schoolteacher in Nyhart, detailed a fire that would destroy the town's schoolhouse in 1914. It provided the date, October 22nd, and mentioned that the fire would start in the stoveroom and spread quickly due to dry conditions and wind. No casualties were expected, it noted, because the fire would occur on a Saturday. On October 22, 1914, the Nyhart schoolhouse burned to the ground. The fire started in the stoveroom. No one was injured because the building was empty on the weekend. The Montana Historical Society invited Dr. Rebecca Samuelson, a forensic document examiner, to analyze the letters. Her report, completed in 2004, confirmed that the paper, ink, and stamps were all authentic period materials. The postmarks were genuine. The envelopes showed age-appropriate deterioration. There was no evidence of modern forgery or alteration. Samuelson noted one peculiarity. The handwriting across all the letters appeared identical, same stroke patterns, same letter formation, same pressure, and spacing. This suggests a single author, her report stated. However, the handwriting doesn't match any samples from known Elkhorn residents available in historical archives. Whoever wrote these letters remains unidentified. Historians attempted to trace the recipients. Most couldn't be verified because the towns didn't exist when the letters were written. For those addressed to existing communities, searches of census records, business directories, and newspaper archives failed to identify the intended recipients. The names appeared authentic for the period, but didn't correspond to any documented individuals. The Montana Historical Society contacted the U.S. Postal Service archives in Washington, D.C., requesting information about postal procedures in the 1880s and whether these letters might represent some kind of administrative error or test. The Postal Service response indicated that the postmarks were legitimate and that the letters had been processed through the Elkhorn Post Office during the stated dates. However, letters addressed to non-existent locations should have been returned to sender or held at the originating post office as undeliverable. Why they were sealed in a strongbox and left in the postmaster's office was unclear. Thomas Gunderson, a retired postal historian who reviewed the case in 2005, noted another anomaly. Postmasters in small towns kept detailed records, he said. They logged outgoing mail, especially unusual items. But there's no mention of these letters in any surviving Elkhorn postal records. It's as if they were processed, but never officially documented. Further investigation revealed additional unsettling details. A letter addressed to Boulder, Montana, an existing town in 1890, warned about a typhoid outbreak that would occur in 1902. It specified the source as contaminated water from Muskrat Creek and recommended boiling all drinking water during August. Boulder experienced a severe typhoid outbreak in August 1902. The source was traced to Muskrat Creek. Local health officials issued boiling advisories. Another letter, addressed to Whitehall, warned of a railroad accident in 1923 involving a derailment near mile marker 47. It described the accident as caused by a failed coupling and noted that 3 crew members would be injured, but no fatalities would occur. In May 1923, a freight train derailed near Whitehall at mile marker 47. The cause was a coupling failure. 3 crew members sustained injuries. No one died. The pattern was consistent. Where verifiable events could be matched to the letter's predictions, the accuracy was exact, not approximate, not general. Exact dates, exact causes, exact outcomes. Dr. Samuelson was asked to examine the remaining unopened letters. She declined. In an interview conducted in 2007, she explained her reasoning. "I can verify that these are genuine artifacts from the 1880s," she said. "What I can't verify is how they contain accurate information about events that occurred decades later. That's not a question for a document examiner. That's a question no one can answer." The Montana Historical Society published a brief article about the discovery in 2008. The article presented the letters as a historical curiosity, noting the unusual addresses and accurate predictions without attempting to explain them. The article generated minimal public interest. The letters remain in the Montana Historical Society archives. They are stored in climate-controlled conditions, cataloged, and available for research by appointment. Few people have requested access. In 2012, a graduate student in American history, Julia Mendoza, reviewed the letters as part of research into frontier postal systems. She noted one additional detail in her thesis that had been overlooked. Several of the unopened letters were addressed to locations in Montana that still don't exist. Towns with names that appear nowhere in state records, past or present. Places that were never founded. Those letters remain sealed. Their contents are unknown. What events they describe, what warnings they contain, what information they hold about places that don't exist. None of this can be verified without opening them. The Montana Historical Society has no plans to do so. In Elkhorn, the old post office continues to deteriorate. The roof has partially collapsed. Weather and time are erasing what remains. Eventually, the building will be gone entirely, returned to the forest that surrounds it. But somewhere in Helena, in a climate-controlled vault, 60 letters wait in silence. Some describe events that have already occurred with impossible accuracy. Others describe events that may still be coming, and a few describe events in places that have never existed. The postmarks are clear. 1889, 1890, 1891. The stamps are authentic. The handwriting is consistent. The predictions are exact. Someone in Elkhorn knew the future. They wrote it down, addressed it carefully, and sealed it away in a strong box beneath the postmaster's desk. No one knows who, no one knows how. The letters offer no explanation. They simply exist, impossible and accurate, waiting in the dark. The ground remembers what the records do not. Bannock sits in Beaver Head County in southwestern Montana, roughly 25 miles west of Dillon. It was Montana's first territorial capital, founded in 1862 after John White discovered gold along Grasshopper Creek. Within a year, the population swelled to over 3,000. The town had a hotel, bakery, multiple saloons, a Masonic lodge, and a courthouse. By 1874, when the territorial capital moved to Virginia City, Bannock's population had begun its decline. The last residents left in the 1930s. Today, it's a state park, preserved as a ghost town, with over 60 structures still standing. The elevation sits at roughly 5,800 feet. The landscape is high desert scrubland, with sagebrush and sparse grasses covering rolling hills. Grasshopper Creek still flows through the valley, though it's much diminished from its gold rush days. Winters are harsh and long. The nearest town of any size is Dillon. Bannock receives thousands of visitors annually, mostly during summer months when the park offers interpretive programs and ghost town tours. The soil composition is typical of the region, sandy loam mixed with decomposed granite and clay. It's good ground for metal detecting, which is why the state park initially allowed hobbyists to survey areas outside the protected historic structures, provided they obtained permits and reported significant finds. In May of 2007, a metal detecting club from Missoula received permission to conduct a weekend survey on the periphery of the park boundaries. The group consisted of 8 members, all experienced hobbyists with proper equipment. They divided the survey area into grids and worked systematically, documenting their finds with GPS coordinates. On the second day, club member Derek Voss located a cluster of coins approximately 400 yards northeast of the main town site. The coins were buried at shallow depth, roughly 8 to 12 inches below the surface. There were 16 of them, Liberty-seated dimes and quarters dating from 1857 to 1861, all in relatively good condition. What struck Voss as unusual was their arrangement. They weren't scattered randomly, as would be expected from a lost purse or dropped coins. They formed a deliberate pattern, a curved line with specific spacing between each coin. He photographed the site before retrieving them and noted the GPS coordinates. When the club returned to Missoula, one member, Angela Russo, who taught high school mathematics, examined Voss's photographs. She recognized the spacing pattern. The distances between coins, when measured and converted to a numerical sequence, formed a Fibonacci progression, each number the sum of the 2 preceding ones. She mentioned this to the group. Most dismissed it as coincidence. Voss was less certain. He contacted the Montana Historical Society to report the find and inquire about similar discoveries. The Historical Society had no record of patterned coin deposits at Bannock. However, a collections manager named Martin Gutierrez mentioned that the park's archives contained references to unusual archaeological features discovered during excavations in the 1980s, though the documentation was incomplete. Voss obtained permission to review those archives. Among the papers, he found notes from a 1984 survey conducted by the University of Montana. The notes mentioned discovering coins arranged in non-random patterns at 3 separate locations around Bannock. The archaeologist who led that survey, Dr. Helen Kowalski, had noted the arrangements but offered no explanation. The coins had been cataloged and stored. No follow-up investigation occurred. Voss contacted Dr. Kowalski, who had retired but still lived in Missoula. In a meeting at her home in August 2007, she retrieved her personal field notes from the 1984 survey. "I remember those coins," she said. "The patterns bothered me. They were too precise to be accidental. I tried to plot them on maps, thinking they might indicate cached locations or property markers. They didn't correspond to anything obvious. I wrote it up in my field notes, but when I submitted my report, my supervisor suggested removing that section. He said it was speculative and distracted from the primary findings. She showed Voss her original notes. She'd sketched the coin arrangements and calculated the spacing. 2 of the 3 patterns matched mathematical sequences. One was a Fibonacci progression, the other was a sequence of prime numbers. "Did you follow them?" Voss asked. "Did you see where they pointed?" Kowalski nodded slowly. "We did." Informally, not as part of the official survey. The Fibonacci sequence pointed to a location about 60 yards from where we found it. We did a test excavation there. We found remains. Human remains. Fairly shallow burial, maybe 2 feet down. She paused. We reported it to the county sheriff. They brought in a forensic team. The remains were old, they said. No identification possible. They took them away. I never heard anything more about it. Voss requested access to the sheriff's records from 1984. The Beaverhead County Sheriff's Office provided a brief incident report. It confirmed that human remains were discovered near Bannock on July 19, 1984, during an archaeological survey. The remains were transferred to the state medical examiner. The case was classified as historical, and no further investigation was conducted. The medical examiner's office had archived records from that period. The remains from Bannock were cataloged as unidentified historical burial, likely 19th century. No further analysis was documented. Voss shared this information with the Metal Detecting Club. Several members expressed interest in conducting additional surveys. In October 2007, with park permission, 4 club members returned to Bannock and conducted a more extensive search. They found 2 additional coin patterns. Both were located within a half-mile of the main town site. One pattern used 18 coins arranged in a geometric sequence. The other used 12 coins forming what appeared to be a modified Lucas sequence. The club members plotted the patterns and extrapolated the directional vectors. Both pointed to locations where no structures or known graves existed. They marked the locations with GPS but did not excavate. Instead, they contacted state park officials and suggested a professional investigation. The Montana State Parks Office authorized a limited archaeological assessment in spring of 2008. Dr. Raymond Ochoa from Montana State University led a small team. They excavated test pits at the 2 locations indicated by the coin patterns. Both sites contained human remains. The burials were shallow, informal, and showed no evidence of coffins or grave markers. The remains were in poor condition, fragmented by time and ground moisture. Dr. Ochoa's preliminary assessment suggested the burials predated Bannock's founding. Carbon dating conducted on bone samples from both sites returned results that were deeply inconsistent with the town's history. One set of remains dated to approximately 1845, plus or minus 8 years. The other dated to approximately 1833, plus or minus 10 years. Bannock wasn't settled until 1862. Dr. Ochoa's report, submitted in September 2008, noted these discrepancies but offered no explanation. The remains predate European settlement in this immediate area, the report stated. However, the burial methods and locations suggest intentional interment, not natural death. The presence of patterned coin deposits associated with these burial sites is highly unusual and requires further investigation to determine cultural origin and purpose. No further investigation was authorized. The remains were cataloged and stored by the State Medical Examiner's Office. The coin patterns were documented in park archives. The sites were backfilled and left undisturbed. In 2012, a graduate student in anthropology named Sofia Mendez requested access to the remains for isotope analysis, hoping to determine geographic origin of the individuals. Her request was denied without explanation. When she appealed, citing academic research purposes, she received a response from the State Historical Preservation Office stating that the remains were part of an ongoing assessment and unavailable for study. No ongoing assessment existed in any official record. Between 2008 and 2015, metal-detecting hobbyists continued to find patterned coin deposits around Bannack. Not frequently, but regularly enough to establish a pattern. Park records show at least 7 additional discoveries. Each followed the same characteristics. Coins from the 1850s and early 1860s, arranged in mathematical sequences pointing to locations that, when excavated, contained human remains predating the town's settlement. Dental records and forensic analysis, where conducted, never matched the remains to any missing persons reports or known individuals. The bodies were consistently dated to periods before Bannack existed, yet the coins used to mark them were from the exact period when the town was booming. The Montana State Parks Office quietly changed its policy in 2016. Metal detecting permits are no longer issued for areas around Bannack. The official reason given is protection of archaeological resources. No mention is made of the coin patterns or associated remains. Dr. Ochoa, in a 2017 interview, described his continuing puzzlement. "Someone buried these people," he said. "Someone who had access to period coins from the 1850s and 1860s. Someone who understood complex mathematics well enough to encode locations using numerical sequences. And they did it in a place where no town existed yet, as if they knew one would be founded there." He paused before adding, "We've found 9 burial sites following this pattern. We've stopped looking for more, but the patterns suggest we haven't found them all. The mathematics indicate additional locations. We just haven't decoded all the sequences yet. The coins remain in state archives, cataloged and stored. The remains are boxed in a facility in Helena, labeled with case numbers and dates, identified only as unknown historical burial, Bannack vicinity. The patterns are documented in reports that gather dust in filing cabinets. And in Bannack, the ground holds its secrets." Visitors walk past unmarked locations where bodies rest in mathematical arrangements, placed there by someone who knew where a town would be built decades later, someone who could predict the future or simply had patience enough to wait for it. The coins were buried deliberately. The bodies were buried deliberately. The mathematics are deliberate. Everything points to intention, a system, a purpose, a knowledge that spans time in ways that make no sense. But the sequences remain. Fibonacci, prime numbers, geometric progressions, hidden in the ground, waiting for someone to solve them completely. And every solution leads to the same thing. Another shallow grave, another set of bones, another person who died before history says anyone was there to die. The arithmetic doesn't lie. But it doesn't explain either. It simply waits, patient as mathematics always is, for someone to finish the equation. Temperature does not keep secrets, except when it does. Granite is located in Granite County, Montana, approximately 15 miles east of Phillipsburg in the Flint Creek Range. It was established in 1872 after high-grade silver ore was discovered at elevations above 7,000 feet. By 1890, Granite was one of the wealthiest towns in Montana, with a population exceeding 3,000. The Granite Mountain Mine and the Bimetallic Mine produced millions of dollars in silver annually. The town had electricity, running water, a hospital, multiple hotels, and its own narrow-gauge railway. The silver crash of 1893 devastated Granite. Within months, the mines closed and residents began leaving. By 1905, the population had dropped below 100. The last residents departed in the 1930s. What remains today are scattered ruins, the Miners' Union Hall, foundations of homes and businesses, collapsed mine structures, and rusted equipment. The elevation ranges from 7,200 to 7,600 feet. Access is via a rough Forest Service road that closes completely in winter due to snow accumulation. The surrounding landscape is typical high-elevation terrain: lodgepole pine, subalpine fir, and open meadows. Wildlife is abundant: elk, Deer, black bears, and mountain lions frequent the area. The climate follows predictable alpine patterns: cold winters with deep snow, brief cool summers, and dramatic temperature swings between day and night, except in one specific area. In July of 1998, a Forest Service botanist named Laura Kleinfeld was conducting vegetation surveys in the Flint Creek Range. Her work involved documenting plant species distribution and correlating it with elevation, soil type, and microclimate conditions. She spent 3 days surveying areas around Granite, taking detailed measurements and environmental readings. On the second day, she noticed something unusual. Her digital thermometer, which she used to record ambient air temperature at each survey site, showed remarkably consistent readings within the town ruins: 43.7 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of time of day or sun exposure. Outside the town area, temperatures varied normally, reaching the low 60s during afternoon hours and dropping to the high 30s at night. She assumed equipment malfunction and switched to a backup analog thermometer. It showed the same reading within the town boundaries. She documented the anomaly in her field notes and continued her survey. When she returned to her office in Missoula and reviewed the data, the temperature consistency stood out. She cross-referenced her GPS coordinates with the readings. The constant temperature occurred within a roughly circular area, approximately a quarter-mile in diameter, centered on what had been Granite's main commercial district. Kleinfeld mentioned the findings to her supervisor, who suggested she'd encountered a localized thermal effect, perhaps cold air drainage from higher elevations or residual cooling from underground mine workings. She accepted this explanation, but noted it in her final report as anomalous microclimate requiring further study. No further study was conducted at that time. In 2004, the National Weather Service installed an automated weather station approximately 2 miles from Granite as part of a network expansion for high-elevation monitoring. The station recorded temperature, humidity, wind speed, and precipitation continuously. In 2006, a meteorologist reviewing the station's data noticed irregularities in the temperature records. During routine quality control checks, technician Mark Holloway flagged several instances where temperatures recorded at the Granite station diverged significantly from expected patterns and from nearby stations at similar elevations. Holloway visited the site in September 2006 to verify the equipment was functioning correctly. He brought calibrated instruments and spent 6 hours taking comparative readings. The weather station equipment was operating within specifications, but when he hiked to Granite itself, less than 2 miles away, his portable thermometer showed 43.7 degrees. He waited 3 hours. The temperature didn't change. Meanwhile, the automated station 2 miles distant recorded temperatures ranging from 48 to 56 degrees during the same period. He documented his findings and submitted a report to his regional office. The report noted possible localized thermal anomaly near historic Granite town site and recommended additional investigation. The recommendation was acknowledged but not acted upon. In a 2013 interview, Holloway described his experience. It wasn't just that the temperature was constant, he said. It was how precise it was, 43.7, not 43.6 or 43.8, always 0.7. And it felt deliberate somehow, like the air was being held at that exact temperature. He paused before adding, "I stayed until sunset." When I finally left the zone and crossed back into normal temperature variation, it was abrupt. One step and suddenly I could feel the evening cooling. Inside the zone, there was no cooling, just that exact temperature, unchanging. Other witnesses emerged over the years. Hikers, hunters, and curiosity seekers who visited Granite reported similar experiences. Dennis Kowalski, a hunter from Anaconda, described camping near Granite in October 2009. "It was early season, cold at night," he said. "I set up camp maybe 300 yards from the old Union Hall. Around midnight, I woke up because something felt wrong. I checked my camp thermometer, 43 degrees. I figured that was normal for the elevation and time of year. But when I got up in the morning, it was still 43. Degrees hadn't changed all night. That's not how alpine temperatures work. They drop significantly at night, especially in October. He broke camp early and moved to a different location. When I got about half a mile away, I could feel it warming up as the sun rose. Normal morning temperature change, but back at that campsite, it had felt frozen, not in terms of being cold, but frozen in time. Same temperature, hour after hour. Jennifer Mbeki, a graduate student in environmental science, visited Granite in June 2011 as part of research into abandoned mine sites. She brought temperature logging equipment that recorded readings every 15 minutes over a 72-hour period. Her data showed the same pattern. Within the town boundaries, temperature held at 43.7 degrees, regardless of solar radiation, cloud cover, or time of day. Outside the boundary, temperatures varied normally, ranging from 38 degrees at night to 63 during peak afternoon hours. She also documented plant phenology, the timing of seasonal biological events. Plants within the constant temperature zone showed disrupted seasonal patterns. Wildflowers that should have bloomed in June were still dormant. Aspen trees showed leaf development stages that didn't match the calendar or the elevation. It was like the plants couldn't tell what season it was, she noted in her research log. They were responding to some signal other than normal environmental cues. Mbeki submitted her findings to her academic advisor, who suggested the data might be contaminated by equipment error. She repeated the survey in August 2011 with different equipment. The results were identical. Her advisor declined to support publication of the findings. "There's no theoretical framework for this," he told her. "Without a plausible mechanism, it's just an anomaly. Journals won't accept it, and it could damage your credibility as a researcher." Mbeki archived her data and moved on to other research topics, but in a 2018 email exchange, she admitted the experience had stayed with her. "I've worked in a lot of remote sites," she wrote. "I've encountered plenty of unusual environmental conditions, but Granite felt different. It wasn't just the temperature. It was the sense that something was maintaining it, actively, deliberately. I know how that sounds, but that's what it felt like." Scientific investigation has been minimal. The U.S. Geological Survey has no active research related to the Granite temperature anomaly. The National Weather Service considers it a localized phenomenon of unclear origin but limited practical significance. The Montana Bureau of Mines has no record of unusual thermal conditions associated with the historic mines in the area. In 2015, a request was submitted to the National Science Foundation for funding to conduct comprehensive thermal mapping and geophysical surveys of the Granite area. The request proposed using infrared aerial imaging, subsurface temperature probes, and continuous monitoring over multiple seasons to characterize the anomaly and investigate possible causes. The request was denied. The review panel noted that while the reported phenomenon was interesting, the proposal lacked sufficient theoretical justification and that natural explanations, such as underground water flow or residual mine heat, were more probable and should be ruled out through simpler methods first. No simpler methods have been attempted. Local residents in Phillipsburg, the nearest town, are aware of Granite's unusual temperature. Most treat it as a curiosity, something mentioned to tourists but not discussed seriously. A few residents describe unease associated with the zone. Harold Fisher, who has lived in Phillipsburg since the 1970s, mentioned a detail that others have corroborated. "People say they feel watched up there," he said. "Not all the time, only when it's exactly that temperature, 43.7. That's when you get the feeling. If you're there during summer when it's warmer outside the zone or winter when it's colder, and you cross into that bubble where it's always 43.7, that's when it happens, like something notices you've entered. When asked what something might mean, Fisher shook his head. Nobody knows. Nobody wants to know, really. It's just what people say. They feel watched. They leave. Most don't go back. The temperature persists. Measurements taken in 2019 by independent researchers confirmed the phenomenon continues unchanged. 43.7 degrees Fahrenheit within a quarter-mile radius, year-round, for at least 20 years and possibly much longer. No theory adequately explains it. Underground thermal sources don't produce such precise temperature regulation. Airflow patterns don't create stable microclimates of this specificity. The mines have been closed for over a century, and any residual heat would have dissipated decades ago. Yet the temperature holds, season after season, year after year, precise, unchanging, inexplicable. And within that zone of frozen temperature, plants remain confused about what season it is, animals pass through quickly without lingering, and people feel the weight of invisible attention. The ruins of granite stand silent in their bubble of constant temperature, maintained by nothing science can identify, sustained by mechanisms no one can explain. 43.7 degrees. Always. Forever. As if something beneath the abandoned town requires it to be exactly that temperature. As if something is waiting for the right conditions. As if something knows that when the time comes, the temperature will need to be precisely 43.7 degrees. And has been holding it there, patient and precise, for longer than anyone knows. Buildings do not rearrange themselves except in Garnet. Garnet is located in Granite County, Montana, approximately 30 miles east of Missoula in the Garnet Range. It was founded in 1895 after gold was discovered in the surrounding hills. The town grew rapidly, reaching a population of around 1,000 by 1898. It had 4 hotels, 13 saloons, multiple stores, a schoolhouse, and a doctor's office. The mines produced steadily until the 1910s, when declining ore quality and rising costs made operations unprofitable. By 1920, most residents had left. A brief resurgence occurred in the 1930s during the Depression, when small-scale miners returned, but by 1940, Garnet was effectively abandoned. Today, Garnet is a preserved ghost town managed by the Bureau of Land Management and the Garnet Preservation Association. Approximately 30 structures remain standing, including the J.K. Wells Hotel, the Davy Store, several cabins, and the Miners' Union Hall. The town sits at roughly 6,000 feet elevation, accessible via a gravel road that becomes impassable in winter. It's one of Montana's best preserved ghost towns, attracting thousands of visitors annually who come to see authentic frontier architecture. The historical record for Garnet is extensive. The town was photographed regularly between 1895 and 1920 by various sources: commercial photographers, newspaper reporters, mining company documentation, and personal collections. The Montana Historical Society, the University of Montana Archives, and private collections hold dozens of images showing the town during its active years. In 2006, architectural historian Dr. Patricia Morales was researching frontier commercial architecture for a book on Montana mining towns. She compiled photographs of Garnet from multiple archives, organizing them chronologically to document the town's development over time. When she compared the images, she noticed inconsistencies. A photograph from 1897 showed the Wells Hotel as a 2-story structure with a false front and exterior staircase on the north side. A photograph from 1901 showed the same hotel, identified by name painted on the front, as a single-story building with no exterior staircase. A photograph from 1907 showed it again as 2 stories, but with the staircase on the south side. Morales initially assumed these were different buildings with similar names or that renovations had occurred. But when she examined other structures in the background of the photographs, she found more inconsistencies. The Davies store appeared in some images as a narrow building with 2 front windows. In other images from similar periods, it was wider with 4 windows. The configuration changed back and forth across the photographic record with no apparent pattern. She cross-referenced the images with property, records, fire insurance maps, and newspaper accounts. No fires were documented in Garnet during the relevant years. No major reconstructions were mentioned in local newspapers. The town's layout, according to official records, remained stable from 1895 through its abandonment. Yet the photographs showed different buildings occupying the same locations at different times. Morales documented her findings in a conference paper presented in 2007 titled Photographic Inconsistencies in Garnet, Montana. Evidence of Unrecorded Reconstruction or Archival Errors. She proposed that either the photographs had been mislabeled or that significant rebuilding had occurred without being documented in newspapers or official records. Her paper attracted the attention of Dr. Alan Fitzpatrick, a specialist in photographic authentication and historical documentation. He requested access to the original photographs to examine them for evidence of manipulation or mislabeling. His analysis, completed in 2008, confirmed that the photographs were authentic period images showing genuine architectural differences. The paper stock, chemical processes, and aging patterns were all consistent with their stated dates. None showed evidence of alteration or composite construction. The photographs were real, taken when they claimed to be taken, showing what they appeared to show. Fitzpatrick noted one additional detail. In several photographs where building configurations differed, the same individuals appeared. A man identified in one image's handwritten caption as Tom Harrington, hotel proprietor, appeared in 3 different photographs from 1901, 1904, and 1908. In 2 of those images, the hotel behind him had different architectural features. Yet the captions and newspaper accounts confirmed he operated the Wells Hotel continuously during that period. Either these structures were rebuilt multiple times with no documentation, Fitzpatrick wrote, or we're looking at something that challenges our understanding of how photographic evidence works. Further research revealed more anomalies. Morales and Fitzpatrick identified what they termed reset events, periods where multiple buildings in Garnet appeared to change configuration simultaneously. The first occurred sometime between 1899 and 1901, the second between 1906 and 1908, the third between 1914 and 1916. Before and after each reset, the town looked different. Not drastically, the general layout remained consistent. Streets were in the same places, but specific buildings had altered. A structure that was 1 story became 2 stories. A building with a peaked roof became flat-roofed. A cabin that sat perpendicular to the street now faced it directly. Residents' written accounts from the period made no mention of these changes. Newspaper articles described routine. Town life without noting major reconstruction. Letters written by residents, preserved in family collections, discussed daily concerns, business dealings, and social events. None mentioned buildings being torn down and rebuilt in different configurations. In 2009, Morales and Fitzpatrick visited Garnet with their compiled photographs. They compared the current structures to historical images. The buildings standing today matched some historical configurations, but not others. The Wells Hotel currently exists as a 2-story structure with an exterior staircase on the south side, matching photographs from 1907 and 1919, but not images from 1901 or 1913. They interviewed members of the Garnet Preservation Association, asking if any structures had been rebuilt or significantly altered during restoration efforts. The answer was no. Preservation policy required maintaining buildings in their existing configuration. Repairs were made using period-appropriate materials and methods, but no structure was demolished or rebuilt. "We've been working here since the 1970s, said longtime volunteer Samuel Kowalski. "These buildings were already here when we started. We stabilized them, replaced some timbers, patched roofs, but we didn't change layouts." What you see now is what was here in the 70s, and based on the materials and construction methods, what was here in the 70s was what was here when the town was abandoned in the 1930s. Yet the photographs clearly showed different configurations. Additional witnesses provided unsettling details. Margaret Holloway, whose grandfather had been one of the 1930s-era miners who briefly reoccupied Garnet, mentioned stories he'd told her as a child. "He said the town felt wrong," she recalled. "He never explained what he meant by that, but he mentioned that sometimes he'd remember buildings being different than they were. He thought maybe his memory was going, or maybe he was confusing Garnet with other mining camps he'd worked. But he was very clear about it. The hotel wasn't the same as he remembered it when he'd worked there in 1934 versus when he returned in 1936. He said the layout had changed, but nobody else seemed to notice or care." A journal entry from Elizabeth Durant, a school teacher who lived in Garnet from 1903 to 1909, contained a peculiar passage. The journal, donated to the Montana Historical Society in 1987 by her descendants, included this entry from May 19, 1908. "I cannot explain the confusion I feel. The mercantile that I have passed each day for 5 years appears somehow different this morning. The windows are wrong, 2 where I recall 4. Thomas says I am mistaken, that the building has always been thus, and perhaps he is right. Memory is fallible, yet I feel certain it was different only yesterday." Subsequent entries made no further mention of the incident. Attempts to find official explanation have yielded nothing. The Montana Historical Society has no record of significant reconstruction in Garnet during its active years. Fire insurance maps from 1903 and 1912 show consistent building footprints, yet photographs from those same years show different structures. County records document property ownership and transfers, but include no building permits or contractor invoices for major renovation work. The Bureau of Land Management, when contacted, acknowledged awareness of the photographic inconsistencies but offered no explanation. A spokesperson stated that the agency's responsibility was preserving structures as they currently exist, not resolving historical documentation discrepancies. In 2011, Morales and Fitzpatrick published their findings in the Journal of Western American History under the title "The Garnet Anomaly: Architectural Discontinuity in Historical Photographic Records." The article presented the evidence without offering definitive conclusions, noting only that conventional explanations involving undocumented reconstruction or photographic mislabeling do not adequately account for the observed patterns. The article generated minimal response from the academic community. Most reviewers treated it as an interesting archival puzzle, likely explained by gaps in documentation or errors in photograph attribution that further research would eventually resolve. No further research has resolved it. The photographs remain. Dozens of authenticated images showing buildings that are simultaneously the same and different. A hotel that is 2 stories and 1 story. A store that is narrow and wide. A town that appears to have changed configuration 3 distinct times while its residents went about their lives, writing letters and keeping journals that mentioned nothing unusual. And in Garnet today, visitors walk past the Wells Hotel, photograph it, and move on. The building stands solid and real, weathered timber gray under Montana sun. It has 2 stories and an exterior staircase on the south side. It has always been this way, as far as anyone can prove. But somewhere in an archive, there's a photograph from 1901 showing that same building with 1 story and no exterior staircase. And somewhere in another archive, There's a photograph from 1913 showing it with 2 stories and a staircase on the north side. The same building, the same location, the same name painted on the false front. Different. As if Garnet had been replaced 3 times with slightly altered versions of itself and no one noticed. Or everyone noticed and no one spoke. The buildings stand silent in their current configuration, holding whatever truth they hold, showing one face while the photographs insist they once showed others. And somewhere in that silence is a question no one has answered. If a town changes and no one documents it, did it really change at all? The photographs say yes. The records say no. The truth remains somewhere between, hidden in the gaps where memory and documentation fail to align. Garnet stands, different than it was, the same as it's always been. Both. Neither. Impossible to know. Time moves at different speeds in Marysville after midnight. Marysville is located in Lewis and Clark County, Montana, approximately 20 miles northwest of Helena in the Belt Mountains. It was established in 1876 after gold was discovered in Silver Creek. By 1885, the population had reached around 4,000. The town had a hospital, opera house, multiple hotels, dozens of saloons, and a reputation for producing some of Montana's richest ore. The Drumlummon mine alone extracted over $16 million in gold. When the mines began to decline in the early 1900s, residents gradually left. By the 1940s, Marysville was nearly abandoned. Today, approximately 75 people live there year-round. Many structures from the boom era still stand, though most are in various states of decay. The elevation sits at roughly 5,800 feet. Dense forest surrounds the town. The nearest services are in Helena. Cell coverage is unreliable. In winter, the town can be cut off for days when snow closes the access road. The landscape is typical mountain terrain. Steep hillsides, narrow valleys, and abandoned mine entrances scattered throughout the surrounding forest. The town itself occupies a small flat area in a valley bottom where Silver Creek flows through. Buildings cluster along what was once the main street, with scattered cabins and mine structures extending up the hillsides. In August of 2011, Dr. Michael Sorensen, an acoustic physicist from Montana State University, arrived in Marysville to conduct research on sound propagation in mountain environments. His work focused on how terrain features affect acoustic patterns, with applications for avalanche prediction and wildlife monitoring. He chose Marysville because of its elevation, surrounding topography, and isolation from urban noise interference. Sorensen set up recording equipment at 6 locations throughout the town and surrounding forest. The equipment included calibrated microphones, digital recorders, and GPS synchronized timestamping to allow precise correlation of sounds across multiple recording sites. He planned to generate controlled sound sources, recorded tones played at specific volumes, and measure how the sounds traveled and reflected in the mountain environment. On the night of August 12th, he conducted tests between 10 in the evening and 6 in the morning to minimize interference from wind and ambient noise. The tests involved playing tones at 15-minute intervals from different locations while recording at all 6 sites simultaneously. When he reviewed the data, he noticed anomalies in recordings from 2 locations within the town. The timestamps showed the sounds arriving 0.8 seconds later than expected based on the speed of sound and measured distances. The delay appeared only in recordings made between 2 and 4 in the morning and only at those 2 specific locations, one near the remains of the old Belmont Hotel, the other near what had been the assay office. Sorensen assumed equipment error. He recalibrated his instruments and repeated the experiment on August 15th with an expanded array of recording devices. The results were identical. The delay persisted at the same locations during the same time window. He documented the findings in his field notes, but continued with his primary research. Before leaving Marysville, he mentioned the anomaly to one of the town's permanent residents, a retired forest ranger named Walter Kowalski. Kowalski was unsurprised. "People have noticed that for years," he said. "The delay. You talk to someone standing near the old hotel between 2 and 4 in the morning, and something feels off about the conversation, like there's a lag, but not the kind you'd get from a bad phone connection. It's hard to explain." Sorensen asked if anyone had investigated it. Kowalski shook his head. "Who would we report it to? It's just one of those things about living here. You learn to avoid certain spots at certain times." Intrigued, Sorensen extended his stay. He recruited 2 graduate students, Lisa Mbiki and Daniel Fierro, to assist with additional experiments. Over the next week, they conducted more extensive testing, including measurements with multiple synchronized audio recorders, video documentation, and controlled human voice experiments. They confirmed the delay existed. It was consistent, 0.8 seconds, always within the same 2-hour window, always at specific locations within Marysville. But they discovered something else. The delay affected human voices but not mechanical sounds. When they played recorded speech through speakers, it traveled at normal sound propagation speed. When they spoke directly, their voices delayed. "We tried everything," Becky later explained in a 2012 interview. "We used different people, different volumes, different pitches. The result was always the same. If a human being produced the sound with their voice, it delayed. If a machine produced it, even if it was a recording of a human voice, it didn't." The most unsettling aspect was how the delay affected conversations. When 2 people stood within the affected zone and spoke to each other during the active time window, both experienced the delay. Person A would begin asking a question, and Person B would start to respond before Person A had finished speaking, not because Person B was interrupting, but because Person B had heard the question 0.8 seconds before Person A had finished asking it from their own perspective. It created this disturbing temporal overlap, Fierro described. You'd hear someone answering a question you hadn't finished asking yet. Your own voice felt like it was lagging behind your thoughts. It was deeply disorienting. Local residents confirmed experiencing similar sensations. Margaret Sullivan, who had lived in Marysville since the 1980s, described early morning conversations with her husband before he passed away in 2005. "Sometimes, when we'd both be up late, talking in the kitchen, the conversation would feel wrong," she said. "I'd hear him respond to something before I'd finished saying it, or I'd find myself answering him before I fully understood what he'd asked. We joked that we'd been married so long we were reading each other's minds, but it wasn't that. It was this delay, this gap where time wasn't working right." Another resident, Thomas Vega, mentioned that some of the town's older inhabitants had stories about the phenomenon dating back decades. "My grandfather lived here in the 30s and 40s, Vega said. "He told me about miners who'd talk about the echo gap. That's what they called it. They said in certain spots, late at night, sound didn't behave right. Some miners refused to work night shifts near those areas. They said it made them feel like they were losing their minds." Sorensen's team attempted to document the phenomenon more rigorously. They brought in additional equipment, laser interferometers to measure air density and pressure, electromagnetic field detectors, and high-speed cameras to record visual correlations with the audio delays. The air density and electromagnetic readings showed nothing unusual. The delays persisted regardless of weather conditions, temperature, or humidity. The phenomenon appeared to be purely temporal. Sound was not traveling slower through the air. It was arriving in the future relative to when it was produced. In September 2011, Sorensen submitted a preliminary report to Montana State University's Physics Department. The report documented the measurements, described the experiments, and concluded that the phenomenon was real but unexplained. He recommended further investigation. The department chair, Dr. Rebecca Watanabe, reviewed the report and responded with skepticism. In a meeting documented in department minutes, she noted that temporal anomalies violating causality required extraordinary evidence and that equipment calibration errors or observer bias were more probable explanations. She declined to authorize funding for additional research. Sorensen appealed the decision, offering to conduct follow-up experiments at his own expense. The appeal was denied. Watanabe's written response stated that continued pursuit of anomalous claims without a theoretical framework risks damaging the department's reputation and the researcher's professional standing. Sorensen was encouraged to focus on his primary research. He complied, but maintained his field notes and raw data from Marysville. In 2013, an independent researcher named Julian Park, who studied unexplained acoustic phenomena, learned about Sorensen's findings through informal academic networks. Park visited Marysville in October 2013 and conducted his own experiments. He confirmed the delay using entirely different equipment and methodology. Park's measurements were consistent with Sorensen's findings. 0.8 seconds, 2 to 4 in the morning, human voices only, specific locations. Park attempted to expand the investigation by examining historical records for references to acoustic anomalies in Marysville. He found fragmentary mentions in miners' letters and diaries from the late 1800s. One letter, written in 1893 by a miner named Jacob Morrison to his brother in Pennsylvania, included this passage: "The night shift has begun to trouble me. There is something wrong with how sound carries in the deeper tunnels. Men speak and you hear them twice, once immediate and faint, once louder but delayed. It creates confusion and unease." Another diary entry from 1898, written by a mine foreman named Charles Holloway, noted, "3 men have requested transfer from night operations. They complain of disorientation and claim the mines are haunted by echoes that answer before questions are asked. I have heard this myself and find it unsettling, though I can offer no explanation." Park's research suggested the phenomenon might be older than the town itself, possibly linked to the geological structures or underground voids created by mining. However, similar mines throughout Montana showed no comparable effects. He attempted to publish his findings in several journals. All rejected the submission. Review comments consistently cited lack of theoretical explanation and suggested the phenomenon was likely an artifact of measurement error or misinterpreted data. The phenomenon continues. Residents of Marysville confirm it persists as of 2020. Those who have lived there long enough know to avoid certain locations during the early morning hours, or, if they must pass through those areas, to remain silent. "You learn where the gaps are," Walter Kowalski explained. "You learn when they're active. Most of us just avoid them. It's easier than trying to understand something that doesn't make sense." The scientific community has shown no further interest in investigating. Sorensen's data remains unpublished. Park's recordings are archived on his personal website, but have attracted little attention beyond fringe research circles. No theory adequately explains why human voices delay, but mechanical sounds do not. No explanation accounts for the precise time window or the specific locations. The phenomenon violates basic principles of acoustic physics and temporal causality, yet it persists, measurable and repeatable. In Marysville, the echo gap waits. Between 2 and 4 in the morning, in certain locations within an abandoned gold mining town, time moves at 2 different speeds for sound. Your voice leaves your mouth and arrives 0.8 seconds in the future. Conversations fold over themselves. Questions are answered before they're finished, being asked. And somewhere in that gap, that tiny fraction of a second where cause and effect separate, something fundamental about how reality works breaks down and refuses to repair itself. The equipment records it precisely. The residents experience it regularly. The physics cannot explain it. But it happens every night in the same places at the same time, 0.8 seconds always, as if that specific delay means something, as if time itself has learned to stutter in Marysville and no one can make it stop. Aircraft do not climb without reason. Maiden is located in Fergus County, Montana, approximately 35 miles northeast of Lewistown in the Judith Mountains. It was founded in 1880 after gold was discovered in the surrounding hills. By 1885, the population had reached around 1,200. The town had multiple stores, hotels, a newspaper, and several stamping mills to process ore. The McGinnis Mine and the Spotted Horse Mine were particularly productive. When the gold deposits declined in the early 1900s, residents gradually left. By the 1930s, Maiden was abandoned. What remains today is scattered across hilly terrain at approximately 5,500 feet elevation. A few structures still stand: remnants of the stamping mill, several cabin foundations, and portions of stone buildings that once lined the main street. The town square, a flat area roughly 100 feet across where the commercial district was centered, is still identifiable despite being overgrown with prairie grass and sage. The surrounding landscape is high plains transitioning to mountain foothills, open country with scattered juniper and pine, dry and windswept most of the year. Maiden sits beneath a common flight path for small aircraft traveling between Lewistown and communities to the northeast. The airspace is uncontrolled. Pilots fly visually, navigating by landmarks and GPS. The terrain below presents no particular hazards, no unusual magnetic deposits, no extreme elevation changes, no structures that would interfere with navigation. On June 14, 2008, private pilot Kenneth Russo was flying a Cessna 172 from Lewistown to Winnett. It was early afternoon, clear weather, light winds. Russo had logged over 800 flight hours and was familiar with the route. He was flying at 6,500 feet above sea level, approximately 1,100 feet above the terrain. As he passed over what he later identified as the Maiden town site, his instruments began malfunctioning. The altimeter fluctuated wildly. The compass spun without settling. The GPS display showed static. The malfunctions lasted approximately 15 seconds, during which Russo felt the aircraft climb sharply, despite maintaining consistent control inputs. When the instrument stabilized, the altimeter showed 6,570 feet, 70 feet higher than his previous altitude. Russo had not adjusted the throttle or changed his pitch. The climb had occurred without his input. He noted the incident in his logbook and mentioned it to other pilots at the Lewistown airport. Most assumed he'd encountered an updraft, a column of rising air caused by thermal heating of the ground. Such phenomena are common in mountainous areas during warm afternoons. Russo accepted this explanation, but noted that the instrument failures were unusual and that he hadn't felt the typical turbulence associated with thermals. On September 3, 2009, pilot Angela Kowalski experienced a similar incident in the same location. She was flying a Piper Cherokee, also heading northeast from Lewistown. As she passed over Maiden, her instruments failed. Her altimeter showed an unexplained gain of approximately 60 feet. The event lasted less than 20 seconds. When she landed in Jordan, she reported the incident to the fixed base operator, who documented it but took no further action. Kowalski mentioned the incident in an online pilot forum, describing the location and asking if others had experienced similar problems. 2 pilots responded, both confirming instrument anomalies when flying over Maiden. One had experienced it in 2006, the other in 2007. Neither had reported it officially, assuming equipment malfunction or environmental interference. The pattern became clearer in April 2011 when commercial pilot Marcus Holloway, flying a chartered Beechcraft Bonanza, experienced not just instrument failure, but a severe enough altitude deviation to trigger an emergency landing. Holloway was flying from Billings to Glasgow with 2 passengers when he passed over Maiden at 7,500 feet. His instruments failed simultaneously: altimeter, compass, GPS, and airspeed indicator. The aircraft climbed sharply. Holloway estimated the gain at 50 to 60 feet based on visual reference and the sensation of climb. The instruments remained inoperative for nearly 30 seconds. When they reset, all showed incorrect readings. The altimeter indicated altitude fluctuations of over 200 feet within seconds, which was impossible given the aircraft's performance capabilities. Holloway declared an emergency and diverted to Lewistown. The landing was routine. Post-flight inspection revealed no mechanical issues. All instruments functioned normally on the ground and during subsequent test flights. The maintenance report concluded no fault found. The Federal Aviation Administration opened an incident investigation. Holloway provided detailed testimony. He described the location precisely using GPS coordinates recorded before the malfunction. The FAA interviewed him, examined the aircraft maintenance logs, and reviewed weather data for the day. No cause was identified. The final report classified the incident as unexplained instrument anomaly. No mechanical fault detected, no further action required. But pilots were talking. The online forums filled with discussions about Maiden. More reports emerged. Between 2006 and 2015, at least 11 pilots documented experiencing instrument failures and unexplained altitude gains when flying over the abandoned town. The altitude gains ranged from 45 to 70 feet. The instrument failures lasted between 10 and 30 seconds. In every case, post-flight inspections found no mechanical problems. Sarah Voss, a flight instructor based in Great Falls, decided to investigate. In July 2015, she flew deliberately over Maiden with recording equipment installed in her aircraft. She brought a backup handheld GPS, a video camera pointed at the instrument panel, and an audio recorder to document her observations in real time. As she crossed over the Old Town Square at 6,800 feet, her instruments failed exactly as others had described. The video showed the altimeter jumping from 6,800 to 6,855 feet within 5 seconds. The compass spun. The GPS display went blank. Voss maintained control, but noted in her audio recording that the aircraft was climbing despite consistent power and pitch settings. When the instruments recovered, they showed she had gained 53 feet. The handheld GPS, which had continued functioning, confirmed the altitude change. She had climbed 53 feet without adjusting throttle, pitch, or trim. The video documentation was unambiguous. Voss submitted her findings to the FAA and to the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. She provided video evidence, GPS data, and detailed testimony. Her report noted that the phenomenon occurred precisely above the geographic center of historic Maiden, within a radius of approximately 200 feet. Outside that radius, instruments functioned normally. The FAA acknowledged receipt of her report, but took no action. An agency spokesperson stated that isolated instrument anomalies do not warrant airspace restrictions or investigations unless they present clear safety hazards. Since all affected pilots had landed safely and no mechanical defects were found, the incidents were classified as unexplained environmental interference, possibly related to localized magnetic or electromagnetic anomalies. The U.S. Geological Survey was contacted to inquire about magnetic anomalies in the Maiden area. A geologist reviewed survey data and confirmed no unusual magnetic deposits existed there. The bedrock was standard Judith Mountains geology, igneous intrusions and sedimentary formations with no properties that would affect aircraft instruments. A more troubling aspect emerged when pilots compared their flight data recordings. Modern aircraft equipped with digital flight data systems record multiple parameters continuously: altitude, airspeed, vertical speed, engine performance, control surface positions. 3 pilots who experienced the maiden anomaly had such systems installed. Analysis of their data showed something impossible. The altitude gains occurred without corresponding changes in airspeed, engine power, or pitch angle. The aircraft climbed as if an external force had lifted them, not as if they had climbed under their own power. The vertical speed indicators showed rates of climb 800 to 1,000 feet per minute that would require significant power increases or pitch changes. Yet engine data showed constant power settings and control surface. Data showed no pitch change. "It's like something picked the plane up and moved it higher," explained Daniel Mbeki, an aviation safety consultant who reviewed the data in 2016. But that's not how physics works. Aircraft don't gain altitude without a reason: engine power, thermal lift, or pilot input. These planes gained altitude with none of those factors present. The data doesn't make sense. 2 additional emergency landings occurred in 2017 and 2019. Both involved experienced pilots. Both occurred when flying over Maiden, and both resulted in successful landings with no mechanical faults discovered. The FAA updated its incident database but issued no warnings or notices to airmen. Local residents in Lewistown are aware of the phenomenon. Several pilots based there avoid flying directly over Maiden, detouring slightly to pass east or west of the town site. "It's just easier," said retired commercial pilot Walter Sullivan. "Add 30 seconds to your flight time. Avoid the hassle. Nobody wants to deal with instruments going haywire and having to explain an emergency landing." Theories have been proposed. Some suggest underground voids from the old mines create updrafts, though this doesn't explain the instrument failures or why the effect is so geographically precise. Others propose electromagnetic interference from buried metal deposits or old mining equipment, though surveys show nothing unusual, and the interference would need to be extraordinarily strong to affect multiple redundant aircraft systems simultaneously. The altitude gain remains unexplained. Aircraft don't climb without aerodynamic forces acting on them. Those forces leave traces: changes in airspeed, changes in angle of attack, changes in engine performance. The data shows no such changes. The planes simply gain altitude, as if the ground below them had moved farther away, or as if they had been lifted by something that leaves no physical signature. Pilots continue to report the phenomenon. As of 2023, the count stands at 19 documented incidents. The pattern is consistent. The location is precise. The instrument failures are identical. The altitude gains are real, measured by multiple independent systems. And no explanation exists. In Maiden, the abandoned town square sits empty under Montana sky. Grass and sage grow where buildings once stood. The wind moves across open ground, carrying no answers. And above, at intervals measured in weeks or months, an aircraft passes overhead. For 15 to 30 seconds, instruments fail. Compass needles spin. Altimeters jump. GPS screens go blank, and the plane climbs. 50 feet, 60 feet, 70 feet, climbing toward nothing, climbing without cause, climbing because something beneath the abandoned town makes it climb, for reasons that remain as empty as the ruins below. The pilots land safely. The mechanics find nothing wrong. The data shows impossibilities. And in Maiden, something waits, something that reaches up when aircraft pass overhead. Something that lifts them higher, just briefly, just enough to be measured and recorded and never explained. Always the same altitude gain. Always the same location. Always the same instrument failures. As if Maiden remembers what it means to rise. As if the abandoned town refuses to let things pass overhead without pulling them closer, just for a moment, just long enough to remind them that some places don't follow the rules. Even after everyone has left, even after the buildings have fallen, even after a century of silence, Maiden still reaches upward. and aircraft still climb without reason. Money leaves a trail, except when it disappears into the ground. Virginia City is located in Madison County, Montana, approximately 70 miles southeast of Butte in the Ruby River Valley. It was founded in May 1863 after gold was discovered in Alder Gulch. Within months, the population exploded to over 10,000, making it one of the largest settlements between St. Louis and San Francisco. The town became Montana's territorial capital in 1865. By 1870, Virginia City had banks, newspapers, theaters, and a sophisticated commercial infrastructure. When the gold declined in the 1880s, the population dropped sharply, but the town never fully emptied. Today, it's a National Historic Landmark with approximately 200 permanent residents and thousands of summer tourists. The elevation sits at roughly 5,800 feet. The surrounding landscape is high mountain valley, sagebrush flats bordered by forested hills. Alder Gulch runs through the valley, its waters once thick with prospectors panning for gold. The historic district preserves over 100 buildings from the gold rush era, including stores, saloons, and homes. Many original business records survived, stored in the Montana Historical Society archives and in private collections maintained by descendants of pioneer families. These records provide an unusually complete economic picture of a frontier boomtown. Ledgers, receipts, invoices, and correspondence document what people bought, sold, and built during Virginia City's peak years. Historians have used these documents to study everything from construction costs to dietary habits to the flow of capital in 19th century mining economies. In 2004, economic historian Dr. Rachel Kowalski was analyzing Virginia City's commercial records for a book on frontier capitalism. Her research involved reviewing hundreds of ledgers from merchants, suppliers, and construction firms operating between 1865 and 1880. She was tracking material flows, timber, nails, glass, fabric, to understand how goods moved through the territorial economy. She noticed an anomaly in the accounts of the Virginia City Mercantile Company, one of the town's largest suppliers. Between March 1871 and November 1876, the company recorded substantial sales of construction materials designated for Underground Project Contract VCC Up. The materials included Portland cement, over 4,000 barrels, steel reinforcing rods, ventilation pipes, waterproofing compounds, and specialized drilling equipment. The quantities were enormous. The cement alone would have been sufficient to construct foundations for dozens of large buildings. The steel reinforcement suggested something substantial and permanent. The ventilation equipment indicated an enclosed space requiring air circulation. Kowalski cross-referenced the entries with other records. She found similar designations in the ledgers of two other suppliers, Morrison & Sons Hardware and the Alder Gulch Supply Depot. All three companies sold materials for the same project between 1871 and 1876. The total expenditure exceeded $200,000, a massive sum equivalent to approximately $5 million in modern currency. She searched for construction records, permits, or project documentation. Virginia City had detailed municipal records from that period, including building permits, land surveys, and infrastructure projects. No reference to Underground Project VCC Up appeared in any official document. She examined mining company records. Virginia City's gold came primarily from placer deposits in Alder Gulch, not underground hard rock mining. A few small tunnels existed, but none required the quantities of concrete and steel documented in the supplier ledgers. The mining company's own records showed no major construction projects during the relevant period. The materials had been purchased, delivered, and paid for. But no structure existed that matched their quantity or purpose. Kowalski expanded her research. She reviewed every preserved business ledger from Virginia City between 1870 and 1880. She found additional references to the underground project. A lumber company sold timber framing. A freight company documented multiple shipments of materials to VCC Upsite, East Gulch. A payroll record from 1873 listed wages paid to underground crew, skilled labor, VCC contract. The project employed workers. It consumed materials. It operated for at least 5 years. Yet it left no visible trace. In 2006, Kowalski published an article in the Montana Historical Review titled "The Invisible Infrastructure, Unaccounted Construction in Virginia City, 1871 to 1876." The article detailed her findings and posed the question, where did the materials go? She calculated that the expenditures represented approximately 18% of Virginia City's total recorded economic activity during those years. It wasn't a minor undertaking. It was one of the largest projects in the town's history, comparable to building the courthouse or constructing the water system. Yet no physical evidence existed. The article attracted the attention of Dr. Thomas Vega, a civil engineer specializing in historical infrastructure. Vega was intrigued by the technical specifications implied by the materials list. The combination of concrete, steel reinforcement, and ventilation equipment suggested an underground structure, possibly a large storage facility, cistern, or tunnel system. In September 2007, Vega visited Virginia City with ground-penetrating radar equipment. He surveyed the areas mentioned in the freight records, East Gulch, which corresponded to the eastern section of Alder Gulch, near what had been the commercial district. His scans detected the usual subsurface features: old foundations, buried refuse, mine tailings, but no large concrete structure, no reinforced chambers, nothing that matched the scale implied by the material purchases. He expanded the survey to include areas outside the historic town center. The results were the same. Whatever had been built, if anything had been built, was either deeper than his equipment could detect or located somewhere else entirely. Other researchers joined the investigation. Dr. Angela Holloway, an archaeologist, reviewed historical photographs of Virginia City from the 1870s. She identified several images showing construction activity: wagons loaded with materials, work crews, excavated areas. One photograph from 1874 showed a large pit in the eastern section of town with timber framing visible at the bottom. The caption, written on the back of the photograph, read, "Foundation work, underground contract." The photograph showed the location. Holloway visited the site. Today, it's an empty lot between two historic buildings. No foundation exists there. No subsurface anomaly appears on ground-penetrating radar. The pit documented in the photograph has vanished without leaving evidence of what filled it. Local historians in Virginia City were aware of vague stories about underground construction. Margaret Sullivan, curator of the local Heritage Museum, mentioned that her grandfather, who was born in Virginia City in 1898, had heard older residents speak of the tunnels or the underground rooms, but details were scarce and contradictory. It was always vague, Sullivan explained. People would mention it in passing, like it was common knowledge, but nobody could say what it was for or where exactly it was. My grandfather said some of the old-timers claimed there were rooms under the town, built during the gold rush, but nobody he talked to had ever been inside them. Another longtime resident, Harold Kowalski, whose family had lived in Virginia City since 1865, mentioned a story his great-grandmother had told. She said there was a project in the 1870s that employed a lot of men. They worked in shifts, day and night. She remembered it because her father was one of the workers. He never talked about what they were building. She said it was understood that you didn't ask. When asked what happened to the project, Kowalski said his great-grandmother claimed it was sealed up in 1876. She used that phrase, sealed up, not finished, not abandoned, sealed, like they closed it deliberately and didn't want anyone going back in. Attempts to find official documentation have been frustrating. The Montana Historical Society archives contain extensive Virginia City records, but nothing directly references the underground project beyond the supplier ledgers. Municipal meeting minutes from the 1870s make no mention of it. Newspaper articles from the era describe various construction projects, buildings, roads, water systems, but never the underground work. Dr. Kowalski filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the U.S. Geological Survey seeking any surveys or geological assessments of Virginia City that might reveal subsurface structures. The USGS response indicated no such structures were documented in their records. She also contacted the Montana Bureau of Mines, which maintains historical mining records. A bureau geologist reviewed the inquiry and responded that no large-scale underground construction unrelated to mining was documented in Virginia City during the 1870s. He noted, however, that record-keeping from that era was inconsistent and that private projects were not always reported to territorial authorities. In 2010, a team from Montana State University's Engineering Department attempted a more sophisticated survey using seismic reflection technology. The method can detect subsurface voids and density anomalies at greater depths than ground-penetrating radar. They surveyed a grid covering approximately 1 square mile centered on historic Virginia City. The results were ambiguous. The data showed several anomalies, areas where seismic waves reflected differently than expected, suggesting possible voids or density variations. But the anomalies were deep, between 80 and 120 feet below the surface, and could equally represent natural geological features, old mine workings, or instrument artifacts. To confirm the findings would require excavation. No permits were granted. Virginia City is a National Historic Landmark, and excavation within the historic district is heavily restricted. The areas outside the district are privately owned, and property owners were unwilling to allow intrusive investigation. The mystery remains documented but unresolved. The ledgers are real, the receipts are authentic, the money was spent, the materials were delivered, workers were paid. The project operated for 5 years and consumed resources equivalent to building a major public structure. Yet nothing exists. No tunnel system, no underground chambers, no massive concrete foundation, no reinforced structure of any kind. The expenditures are there, clear in the ledgers, accounting for 18% of the town's economy during its peak years. The money went somewhere. The materials went somewhere. The labor produced something. But what they produced has vanished, or was never meant to be found, or exists so deep beneath Virginia City that no survey has reached it. And in the archives, the receipts remain. Thousands of them. Portland cement, steel reinforcement, ventilation equipment, waterproofing compounds, delivered to Virginia City, used for the underground project, paid for in full, all of it gone. All of it invisible, all of it real only in the numbers written in careful 19th century, script in ledgers that refuse to lie. Somewhere beneath Virginia City, or near it, or in a place the records don't quite specify, 18% of a boomtown's economy was buried. Deliberately, completely, successfully. And no one alive knows where or why or what remains down there, sealed in 1876, waiting in concrete and steel and darkness. The receipts tell the truth. The ground keeps the secret. And the numbers add up to something that no longer exists, except in the careful accounting of merchants who recorded every transaction and asked no questions about what their customers were building in the dark. The earth has a heartbeat beneath Coolidge, and it beats at the same rhythm as yours. Coolidge is located in Jefferson County, Montana, approximately 40 miles southwest of Helena in the Boulder River Valley. It was founded in 1874 after silver deposits were discovered in the surrounding hills. The town grew modestly, reaching a population of around 600 by 1880. It had a general store, several boarding houses, a stamp mill, and the infrastructure typical of small mining camps. Unlike larger boom towns, Coolidge never achieved significant prominence. The ore quality was adequate, but not exceptional. By 1905, the mines had closed. Most residents left within a few years. By 1920, Coolidge was empty. What remains today is scattered across a hillside at roughly 5,400 feet elevation. A few timber structures still stand in various states of collapse. Stone foundations mark where other buildings once existed. The mine entrances were sealed decades ago. The site is remote, accessible only by Forest Service roads that become impassable in winter. Few people visit. The surrounding terrain is typical Montana high country, pine forest, rocky slopes, and seasonal streams. Wildlife is abundant. The area is quiet, in the way abandoned places are quiet, with only wind and birdsong to break the silence. The geology beneath Coolidge consists primarily of granite and metamorphic rock, similar to much of the Boulder batholith region. The mines followed silver veins that extended to moderate depths, generally no deeper than 300 feet. Geological surveys conducted in the 1930s documented the subsurface structure and confirmed no unusual features existed below the town. In June 2015, Dr. Marcus Holloway, a seismologist with the University of Montana, installed a network of sensitive seismographs across western Montana as part of a long-term study monitoring crustal stress and earthquake potential. The instruments were placed in remote locations to minimize interference from human activity. One station was positioned approximately half a mile from the Coolidge town site. The seismographs recorded continuously, transmitting data via satellite link to Holloway's laboratory. The equipment was calibrated to detect very low-frequency vibrations, subsonic pulses below the range of human hearing. Such vibrations can provide early warning of seismic events and reveal details about underground geological structures. In September 2015, while reviewing 3 months of accumulated data, Holloway noticed an anomaly in the Coolidge station's recordings. A repeating pulse appeared in the subsonic range, approximately 8 Hz, occurring with metronomic regularity. The pulse was faint but consistent, appearing in the data every second, 24 hours a day. 8 Hz is significant. It's the approximate frequency of a resting human heart rate, roughly 60 to 70 beats per minute, translates to just over 1 beat per second, or about 8 cycles per second when measured in hertz. Holloway assumed equipment malfunction. He visited the site in October 2015, replaced the seismograph with a backup unit, and verified all connections. The new equipment recorded the same pulse. He brought a portable seismometer and confirmed the signal was real, not an instrument artifact. The pulse originated from deep below the surface. Triangulating with data from other stations in the network, Holloway calculated the source depth at approximately 800 feet directly beneath the old Coolidge town site. The signal strength suggested a source with considerable energy, though not enough to be felt as vibration on the surface. Only sensitive instruments could detect it. Holloway documented his findings and consulted colleagues. No natural geological process produces such regular subsonic pulses. Earthquakes are erratic. Volcanic activity is irregular. Groundwater movement doesn't create rhythmic signals. The pulse was too consistent, too precise. He considered man-made sources. Industrial equipment can produce regular vibrations, but Coolidge had been abandoned for nearly a century. No mining, no drilling, no machinery of any kind operated in the area. Even if some equipment had been left running, an impossibility given the lack of power infrastructure, Nothing from 1905 would still function in 2015. The depth was also problematic. 800 feet was deeper than any of Coolidge's documented mines. Creating a mechanical system at that depth would have required technology and resources far beyond what a small silver mining town possessed in the late 19th century. Dr. Holloway presented his findings at a regional seismology conference in March 2016. The presentation included spectral analysis of the pulse, source depth calculations, and a discussion of the absence of plausible explanations. The response was polite skepticism. Several colleagues suggested the signal might be an artifact of data processing or interference from distant sources that appeared localized due to unusual wave propagation. Holloway invited 2 other seismologists to independently verify his findings. Dr. Sarah Vega from Colorado State University and Dr. Alan Kowalski from the University of Washington both visited Coolidge in summer 2016 with their own equipment. Both confirmed the pulse. Both measured it at 8 Hertz. Both calculated the source at approximately 800 feet below the town site. None of them could explain it. Word spread informally through academic networks. In October 2016, a group of graduate students and researchers camped near Coolidge for 3 nights to conduct additional measurements and observations. The group included geophysicists, geologists, and an acoustic specialist. What they discovered was more disturbing than the seismic data. On the second night, several members of the group reported feeling unusual sensations while trying to sleep. Melissa Ortega, a geology graduate student, described her heart rate synchronizing with an external rhythm. "I could feel my heartbeat," she said in a later interview, "but it felt like it was being pulled into sync with something else, like my heart was trying to match a pulse that wasn't mine." She checked her heart rate with a fitness monitor. It showed 72 beats per minute, 8 Hertz, exactly matching the subsonic pulse detected by the seismographs. 3 other members of the group reported similar experiences. When they compared notes the next morning, they discovered something more unsettling. All 4 had experienced nearly identical dreams. They described descending a narrow shaft or tunnel, moving downward continuously, unable to stop or turn back. The descent felt endless. They woke before reaching any destination, but the sensation of falling stayed with them. "It wasn't like a normal dream," said Daniel Mbeki, one of the researchers. "It was too specific, too consistent across multiple people. We all dreamed the same thing, going down deeper and deeper, with no light and no end." The group decided to leave a day earlier than planned. Several members reported feeling uneasy, though they couldn't articulate why. The data they collected confirmed the pulse continued unchanged. Additional groups visited Coolidge over the following 2 years. Not all reported the synchronized heartbeat or shared dreams, but enough did to establish a pattern. Those who spent multiple nights camping within a half-mile radius of the town site were more likely to experience the phenomena. Those who stayed farther away reported nothing unusual. In 2018, Dr. Holloway attempted to drill an exploratory borehole to investigate the source of the pulse. He secured minimal funding and contracted a local drilling company. The plan was to drill to 900 feet, slightly deeper than the calculated source depth, and install instruments directly adjacent to whatever was producing the signal. The drilling began in July 2018. At 420 feet, the drill encountered unexpected resistance. The drillers described it as striking something that wasn't quite rock, denser than expected, but with a texture they couldn't identify. The drill bit jammed repeatedly. Progress slowed to inches per hour. At 460 feet, the drill broke through into a void. Air pressure equalized with a sound the drillers described as a deep exhalation. The drill dropped suddenly, free-falling for several seconds before striking something solid at an unknown depth below. When they attempted to retrieve the drill string, it wouldn't budge. After 6 hours of effort, the cable snapped. The entire drill assembly, over 400 feet of steel pipe and a diamond-tipped bit, was lost in the hole. Holloway attempted to lower a camera into the borehole. The camera descended to 460 feet and stopped transmitting. When retrieved, the electronics were undamaged, but the memory card was blank. No images were recorded. The drilling company declined to continue. The project manager, Robert Sullivan, later said the crew felt uncomfortable at the site. There was nothing specific, he explained, just a sense that we shouldn't be there, like we were intruding on something that didn't want to be disturbed. The borehole was capped and abandoned. No further drilling attempts have been made. The Montana Bureau of Mines reviewed Holloway's data and declined to investigate further. A bureau geologist noted in a brief memo that the seismic pulse, while unusual, presented no public safety concern and likely had a natural explanation that would be clarified by future research. No future research has been authorized. The U.S. Geological Survey acknowledged Holloway's findings but stated that investigation of localized seismic anomalies was outside their current priorities. A USGS representative suggested the phenomenon might be related to groundwater movement or resonance effects in subsurface voids, though no mechanism was proposed for how such processes would produce a regular 8 Hz pulse. Holloway published a paper in a peer-reviewed seismology journal in 2019. The paper documented the pulse, described the source depth calculations, and concluded that no conventional explanation was adequate. The paper acknowledged the reports of synchronized heart rates and shared dreams, but did not emphasize them, noting only that anecdotal accounts from researchers working at the site suggest possible physiological effects of extended exposure to the subsonic signal. The paper received little attention. Most seismologists considered it an interesting anomaly, but not significant enough to warrant investigation beyond what Holloway had already done. The pulse continues. As of 2023, the seismograph station near Coolidge still records it. 8 Hz, constant, unwavering, emanating from 800 feet below an abandoned silver mining town that never dug that deep. Those who camp nearby still report synchronized heartbeats, still report dreams of descending, still report the sense that something far below is breathing in rhythm with them, matching their pulse, pulling them into sync with whatever machinery or process or presence beats beneath Coolidge like a buried heart. The Earth's heartbeat is supposed to be irregular, the chaotic pulse of tectonic forces, magma movement, and crustal stress. It's not supposed to be regular. It's not supposed to match human rhythm. But beneath Coolidge, something beats at 8 Hz, 1 pulse per second, 72 beats per minute, the exact rate of a human heart at rest. And when you sleep above it, your heart learns to match. And when you dream above it, you descend toward whatever is producing the rhythm, moving down through darkness toward a source you never reach. The seismographs measure it precisely. The data is clean and unambiguous. 8 Hz, 800 feet down, continuous since at least 2015, and likely long before that. Something beneath Coolidge has been beating for a very long time. Slow, patient, regular as a metronome, regular as a heartbeat, waiting for hearts above to fall into rhythm, waiting for dreamers to descend. The pulse continues, the dreams continue, the synchronization continues. And 800 feet below an empty town site in Montana, something breathes in time with anyone who stays long enough to listen. Shadows remember what time has erased. Zortman is located in Phillips County, Montana, in the Little Rocky Mountains approximately 40 miles south of Malta. It was established in 1884 after gold was discovered in the region. The town grew steadily, reaching a peak population of around 1,500 by 1915. It had hotels, saloons, stores, a school, and the infrastructure of a working mining community. The Ruby Gulch Mine and the Alder Gulch Mine were particularly productive. When gold prices declined in the 1920s and 30s, many residents left. Mining continued intermittently through the 20th century, with brief revivals during periods of higher gold prices. Today, Zortman has fewer than 100 permanent residents. The town sits at approximately 4,700 feet elevation in a narrow valley. The surrounding terrain is rugged, steep hillsides covered with pine and juniper, rocky outcrops, and old mine tailings. The Little Rocky Mountains are isolated, rising abruptly from the surrounding plains. Access is via a two-lane highway that winds through the mountains. In winter, the area receives significant snow and can be difficult to reach. The current town layout is sparse. Most buildings from the boom era are gone, demolished, or collapsed over the decades. A few structures remain: the community center, several residences, and some commercial buildings. The town occupies a fraction of the space it did during its peak years. In November 2012, Dr. Angela Russo, a geographer specializing in remote sensing at Montana State University, was conducting research on abandoned mining towns using high-resolution satellite imagery. Her project involved documenting how former boom towns had changed over time by comparing historical maps with current satellite data. Zortman was on her list. She obtained satellite imagery from multiple dates and times of year, part of a commercial data set with sub-meter resolution. The images were sharp enough to identify individual buildings, vehicles, and landscape features. While examining imagery taken in January 2012, Russo noticed something unusual. The shadows cast by buildings in Zortman didn't match the structures visible in the images. A shadow appeared to show a two-story building with a peaked roof, but the corresponding location on the ground showed only an empty lot. Another shadow suggested a long, narrow structure, but the actual site was vacant. She assumed data corruption or processing errors. But when she examined imagery from February 2012, the discrepancies persisted. The shadows continued to show structures that weren't there. She cross-referenced the shadow shapes with historical maps and photographs of Zortman from the early 1900s. The shadows matched buildings that had existed decades earlier. A shadow showing a two-story peaked structure corresponded exactly to the location and dimensions of the Miners' Hotel, demolished in 1953. Another shadow matched the Lucky Strike Saloon, torn down in 1948. Russo expanded her analysis. She examined satellite imagery of Zortman from different seasons and years, going back to 2008. The anomaly appeared consistently in images taken between October and March, the months when the sun angle is lower and shadows are longer. In images from April through September, when the sun is higher, the shadows match the current structures normally. But during the winter months, the shadows showed buildings that no longer existed. She documented her findings meticulously. She measured shadow angles, verified sun positions, and confirmed that the imagery metadata was accurate. The shadows were real features in the satellite data, not artifacts or glitches. They appeared consistently across multiple years and multiple imaging satellites operated by different companies. In March 2013, she presented her findings at a geospatial analysis conference. The presentation included side-by-side comparisons of satellite imagery and historical maps, demonstrating the precise alignment between anomalous shadows and demolished structures. The response was skeptical. Most attendees assumed data processing errors or unusual reflectance properties of the ground that created shadow-like patterns. One attendee, Dr. Thomas Kowalski, a remote sensing specialist with the U.S. Geological Survey, offered to review the data independently. Over the following months, he obtained the raw satellite imagery and processed it using different software and methods. His results matched Russo's. The shadows showed buildings that weren't there. Kowalski noticed an additional detail. When he examined very high-resolution imagery, images with pixel sizes of 30 centimeters or less, he could see faint patterns within the anomalous shadow buildings. What appeared to be windows showed variations in darkness, as if some were lit and others weren't. He enhanced the images and observed patterns that resembled movement, slight changes in the window darkness between images taken minutes apart by the same satellite on successive passes. It looked like people moving inside shadow buildings. He shared this observation with Russo. Together, they analyzed sequences of high-resolution images from winter 2013. They focused on one anomalous shadow that corresponded to the historical location of the Zortman boarding house, a 3-story structure demolished in 1957. In a series of 9 images taken over 3 hours on a January afternoon, they documented changes in the window patterns. Some windows darkened, others lightened, in sequences that suggested interior activity. The changes followed a logical progression. Windows on the ground floor showed activity first, then upper floors, mimicking how occupants might move through a building during late afternoon hours. It was like watching a time-lapse of a workday ending, Russo later explained. Ground floor windows showing activity, then people going upstairs as evening approached. But the building hasn't existed for over 50 years. They attempted to present these findings in peer-reviewed journals. The submissions were rejected. Reviewers noted that while the shadow anomalies were interesting, attributing the patterns to phantom occupants was speculative and unsupported by any physical mechanism. One reviewer wrote, "The authors have documented unusual image artifacts, but have failed to distinguish between genuine anomalies and misinterpretation of data." Russo and Kowalski decided to visit Zortman. In December 2013, they traveled there with GPS equipment, cameras, and the satellite imagery. They located the sites where anomalous shadows appeared. The locations were vacant lots, empty ground covered with snow and scrub vegetation. No structures stood there. No foundations remained visible above ground. They spoke with longtime residents. Margaret Voss, who had lived in Zortman since the 1960s, mentioned that some of the old-timers used to talk about shadow buildings, but always in vague terms. They'd say things like, "You can still see the old town when the light's right," Voss recalled. "I always thought they meant you could see foundations or old roads. I didn't realize they meant shadows." Another resident, Harold Sullivan, whose grandfather had worked in the mines during the 1920s, said his grandfather had mentioned that Zortman felt crowded during winter months, even after most people had left. He said you'd walk through town in the evening and feel like there were more people around than there actually were, like the place remembered being full. A third resident, Linda Holloway, noted that her family avoided certain parts of town during winter. "My parents said it was because of snow and ice, but I always sensed it was something else. There were spots where it felt wrong to walk, especially in late afternoon when the shadows got long, like you were intruding on something." Russo and Kowalski attempted to interest federal agencies in investigating. They contacted the U.S. Geological Survey's Land Remote Sensing Program, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. All declined to investigate. Agency responses uniformly stated that the phenomenon, while interesting, was likely explained by ground surface properties, creating unusual shadow patterns, and that further investigation was not a priority. A request to the satellite imaging companies for additional high-resolution coverage of Zortman during winter months was denied. The companies indicated that tasking satellites for specific locations required commercial contracts or government authorization, neither of which Russo could obtain. In 2015, Independent. Researcher Daniel Mbeki, who studied anomalous geospatial phenomena, learned of Russo's work and obtained archived satellite imagery covering Zortman. He confirmed the shadow anomalies and conducted additional analysis. He discovered that the phenomenon had been ongoing for at least as long as high-resolution satellite imagery existed, back to the early 2000s at minimum. Mbeki also noted temporal patterns. The shadow buildings appeared most prominently between 3 and 5 in the afternoon during winter months. This corresponded to the time when actual miners would have been ending their workday in the early 1900s. The window pattern suggested activity consistent with people returning home, lighting lamps, and moving through domestic spaces as evening approached. It's as if the satellite is imaging not what's there now, but what was there during a specific time of day nearly a century ago, Mbeki wrote in an unpublished report. The data shows a town frozen in time, visible only during the season and hour when it would have been most active. He attempted to present his findings at multiple conferences. Most rejected the submissions outright. One acceptance came from a fringe science symposium in 2017, but the presentation attracted little serious attention. The phenomenon continues. Satellite imagery from winter 2020 and 2021 shows the same shadow anomalies. The demolished buildings cast shadows. The windows show patterns of light and dark. The town that no longer exists appears in the data as clearly as the town that does. No theory adequately explains it. Ground surface properties don't create building-shaped shadows where no buildings stand. Optical illusions don't persist across multiple satellites, multiple years, and multiple imaging technologies. Data artifacts don't align perfectly with historical building locations or show internal patterns suggesting occupancy. Yet the data is there, consistent, repeatable, available to anyone with access to commercial satellite imagery and the knowledge to analyze it. In Zortman, between October and March, when the sun is low and the shadows are long, the old town returns, not physically, not in any way that can be touched or measured except through cameras orbiting hundreds of miles above. But it returns in shadow, cast by buildings that no longer exist, occupied by people who are no longer alive, following the rhythms of workdays that ended a century ago. The satellites see it, the data records it, the imagery preserves it. And in the empty lots where hotels and boarding houses once stood, the ground remembers what stood there. And when the light is right, when the season is right, when the hour is right, the shadows remember too. They remember the shape of walls, the angle of roofs, the placement of windows. They remember people moving inside, lighting lamps, ending their days in a town that thrived and died and somehow refuses to be completely forgotten. The shadows cast themselves from nothing, falling across snow and sage, precise as historical photographs, detailed as memory, real as anything that can be measured and documented and analyzed, but never explained. Zortman's shadow census continues. Every winter, every afternoon, the count of buildings that aren't there, the movement of people who don't exist, all of it visible from space, all of it undeniable in the data, all of it impossible on the ground. The light remembers, the shadows remember. And somewhere between what was and what is, Zortman lives on, not in Montana, but in the angles of winter sun, casting ghosts of itself onto empty earth for satellites to record and researchers to document and no one to explain. Water does not remain unchanged for over a century. Rimini is located in Lewis and Clark County, Montana, approximately 15 miles west of Helena in the Continental Divide region. It was founded in 1864 after silver and lead deposits were discovered in the surrounding mountains. The town grew quickly, reaching a population of around 300 by 1870. It had a stamp mill, several stores, a school, and the typical infrastructure of a small mining camp. Mining continued intermittently through the early 1900s, with operations finally ceasing in the 1950s. By the 1970s, Rimini was abandoned. Today, it consists of scattered ruins and a few structures in various states of collapse. The elevation sits at approximately 6,200 feet. The terrain is steep mountain country, dense forest, rocky slopes, and narrow valleys. 10 Mile Creek flows through the area, fed by mountain springs and snowmelt. The region receives significant precipitation, and water is abundant throughout most of the year. The geology consists primarily of granite and metamorphic rock, typical of the northern Rockies. Several hand-dug wells exist around the old town site, dating to the 1860s and 70s. Most were capped or filled decades ago, but a few remain accessible, their stone-lined shafts still containing water fed by underground springs. In August 2009, Dr. Patricia Vega, a hydrologist with the Montana Department of Environmental Quality, was conducting a survey of water quality near abandoned mine sites. Her work focused on identifying contamination from historic mining operations, heavy metals like arsenic, lead, and mercury that leach from old tailings and waste rock. Rimini was on her survey list because of its mining history and proximity to Helena's watershed. She collected water samples from 10 Mile Creek, several seeps near old mine sites, and from 2 accessible wells in the old town site. The samples were sent to the state laboratory for standard analysis, pH, dissolved minerals, heavy metal content, and bacterial contamination. The results for the creek and mine seeps showed expected patterns. Elevated heavy metals, acidic pH, mineral content consistent with local geology. The wells showed something different. The water was remarkably pure. Low mineral content, neutral pH, no detectable heavy metals. The composition matched drinking water standards with no treatment required. What was unusual was the specific mineral profile. Vega cross-referenced the analysis with historical records. The Montana Bureau of Mines had conducted water quality testing in Rimini in 1894 as part of a statewide assessment of mining camp water supplies. The archived report included detailed chemical analyses of several wells. The mineral profile from Vega's 2009 samples matched the 1894 data almost exactly, not approximately, not within a range, nearly identical, down to trace elements present in parts per million. Water chemistry changes over time. Contamination enters from surface sources. Minerals leach from surrounding rock. Seasonal variations alter composition. Finding water with identical chemistry to samples taken 115 years earlier was implausible. Vega assumed laboratory error or mislabeled samples. She returned to Rimini in September 2009 and collected fresh samples, carefully documenting the collection sites with GPS coordinates and photographs. She sent the samples to a different laboratory, a private facility in Bozeman. The results were the same. The water chemistry matched the 1894 data. The laboratory technician noted one additional detail. The water contained trace amounts of minerals that weren't consistent with Montana geology. Specifically, rare earth elements typically found in alkaline igneous rocks that don't occur in the Helena area. Vega consulted with colleagues. No one could explain it. One suggested the wells might be fed by unusually deep aquifers that had remained isolated from surface changes, but the wells were shallow, less than 30 feet, and should have been affected by more than a century of environmental change. In November 2009, Vega returned to Rimini with Dr. Marcus Holloway, a geochemist from the University of Montana. They collected samples from both wells, from 10 Mile Creek and from several springs in the surrounding area. They also collected rock samples to analyze the local geology. The laboratory results confirmed the anomaly. The well water chemistry matched the 1894 data. The trace rare earth elements were present in concentrations that didn't match any surrounding rock formations. The water appeared to be unchanged since the late 19th century, despite existing in shallow wells exposed to infiltration and environmental factors. Holloway attempted to trace the water source. He used isotopic analysis, examining ratios of oxygen and hydrogen isotopes that indicate where water originated and how long it has been underground. The results were contradictory. The isotopic signature suggested the water was recently infiltrated within the past 5 to 10 years based on atmospheric isotope ratios. Yet the mineral composition indicated it had been isolated for over a century. "It's like the water is new but remembers being old," Holloway later said in an interview. "The isotopes say it fell as rain recently. The chemistry says it hasn't changed since the 1890s. Both can't be true, but both are what the data shows." In March 2010, Vega learned of an incident involving hikers who had visited Rimini. A couple from Missoula, Sarah and David Kowalski, had camped near the town site in July 2009, the same month Vega had conducted her initial survey. During their stay, they drank water from one of the wells, assuming it was safe based on its clarity and lack of odor. Both reported experiencing vivid, detailed dreams that night. The dreams weren't typical. They were specific, coherent, and shared elements despite the couple not discussing them until the next morning. Both dreamed of Rimini as an active town, populated with miners and families. They could see details, clothing styles, building interiors, faces of people they'd never met. The dreams felt less like imagination and more like memories. "It was like watching a film," Sarah Kowalski explained in a later phone interview, "but I was also somehow present. I could see the main street, the stamp mill running, people going about their day. It wasn't vague or symbolic, it was specific. I saw a woman hanging laundry outside a cabin. I could describe the pattern on the fabric. That's not how dreams usually work." David Kowalski added, "We both woke up at the same time and immediately started talking about it. We'd dreamed similar things. The same town, the same period. We both saw the mill. We both saw miners coming off shift. It wasn't scary, it was just strange, like we'd somehow accessed information we shouldn't have." They returned home and thought little of it until weeks later when Sarah happened to mention the experience to a local historian who specialized in Montana mining towns. The historian showed them photographs from Rimini dating to the 1880s and 90s. The Kowalskis recognized specific buildings, the layout of the main street, and even some details of how the stamp mill was configured. "We'd never seen those photographs before," David said, "but we'd seen what was in them, in the dreams. It was unsettling." The historian, Michael Sullivan, contacted Vega after hearing about her water quality work in Rimini. He mentioned the Kowalskis' experience and suggested a possible connection. Vega was skeptical but documented the account. Over the next 2 years, 3 other groups reported similar experiences after visiting Rimini and drinking from the wells. Not everyone who drank the water reported effects, but those who did described consistent patterns, vivid, detailed dreams or waking impressions of Rimini during its active period, accurate historical details they couldn't have known, and a sense of accessing memories that weren't theirs. Angela Russo, a teacher from Butte, camped at Rimini in August 2011. She drank water from one of the wells, and that night dreamed of a fire in the town, a specific building burning, people trying to save it, and the aftermath. She later found newspaper articles from 1876 describing a fire that destroyed the mercantile building. Her description of the building and the event matched the historical account, despite her having no prior knowledge of it. "I don't believe in psychic phenomena or anything like that," Russo said, "but I can't explain what happened. I saw things, knew things. that I shouldn't have known. And it only happened after drinking that water. Vega attempted to interest state and federal agencies in investigating. The Montana Department of Environmental Quality declined, noting that the water met safety standards and the reported experiences were anecdotal and outside the scope of their regulatory authority. The Centers for Disease Control stated that without evidence of pathogenic contamination or toxic exposure, the water presented no public health concern. A request to the U.S. Geological Survey for detailed hydrological study of the Rimini wells was denied due to lack of funding and competing priorities. A USGS hydrologist reviewed Vega's data and acknowledged the unusual chemistry, but suggested it might result from localized geological features that hadn't been adequately characterized. Vega and Holloway published a paper in a regional hydrology journal in 2013. The paper documented the chemical composition of the well water, the match to historical data, and the presence of rare earth elements inconsistent with local geology. The paper made no mention of the reported experiences of people who drank the water, focusing only on the analytical chemistry. The paper received minimal attention. Most readers treated it as an interesting geochemical oddity, likely explained by factors not yet identified. In 2015, the Forest Service closed access to the Rimini townsite due to safety concerns, unstable structures, open mine shafts, and potential contamination from old mining operations. The wells were capped as part of the closure. No further sampling has been conducted. The water remains in those sealed wells, unchanged from the 1890s, containing minerals that shouldn't exist there, fed by sources that defy isotopic dating, holding whatever it is that water holds when it refuses to forget. Those who drank it still remember the memories that weren't theirs. They remember a town they never saw, people they never met, events they never witnessed. The memories fade slowly, like secondhand photographs losing detail, but they don't disappear entirely. And beneath Rimini, in stone-lined shafts capped and forgotten, water sits in darkness. Water that tastes of the past. Water that carries information from 130 years ago, perfectly preserved, perfectly impossible, waiting for anyone who might unseal it and drink. The chemistry doesn't lie. The isotopes don't lie. The witnesses don't lie. But their truths contradict each other, leaving only questions and the certainty that something in Rimini's water refuses to follow the rules of time. Water that remembers. Water that shares what it remembers. Water that shouldn't exist but does, sealed now beneath concrete and steel, holding its secrets in the dark, patient as geology, strange as history, real as any memory you've ever had that felt like someone else's. The wells are closed, the water remains, the memories persist, and somewhere in the chemistry of hydrogen and oxygen and trace minerals that don't belong, Rimini continues, not as a place, but as information coded in water, waiting to be tasted, waiting to be remembered, waiting to blur the line between what you lived and what someone else lived long before you were born. Some maps reveal what was never built or what shouldn't have been. Southern Cross is located in Beaverhead County, Montana, approximately 40 miles west of Dillon in the Pioneer Mountains. It was established in 1892 after gold was discovered in the area. The town grew quickly, reaching a population of around 600 by 1895. It had the standard infrastructure of a mining camp, saloons, stores, a hotel, and housing for workers. The mines produced steadily through the early 1900s, but declined after World War I. By the 1930s, most residents had left. Today, Southern Cross is largely abandoned, with only a handful of seasonal cabins occupied during summer months. The elevation sits at approximately 7,400 feet in a narrow mountain valley. The terrain is steep, heavily forested with lodgepole pine and Douglas fir. Willow Creek flows through the valley bottom. The geology consists of granite and metamorphic rock typical of the Pioneer Range. The water table is high due to mountain snowmelt and numerous springs. Mining at Southern Cross was primarily surface placer operations and shallow hard rock workings, rarely exceeding 200 feet in depth. Deeper mining was considered impractical due to groundwater infiltration and unstable rock conditions. Access to Southern Cross is via Forest Service roads that are rough and often impassable outside of summer months. The town receives few visitors. Most structures have collapsed or been removed. What remains are scattered foundations, mine tailings, and fragments of buildings slowly being reclaimed by forest. In June 2016, the Montana Bureau of Mines conducted a LiDAR survey of abandoned mining districts across the state. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, uses laser pulses to create detailed three-dimensional maps of terrain and surface features. The technology can penetrate forest canopy and reveal landscape details invisible from conventional photography or ground observation. The survey of Southern Cross was part of a routine mapping project documenting historic mining sites. Dr. Rebecca Kowalski, a geologist with the Bureau, was responsible for processing the LiDAR data and creating topographic models. When she examined the Southern Cross dataset, she noticed something unusual. The street layout of the old town, the arrangement of roads and building sites, formed a pattern. When she inverted the map, treating the streets as voids and the building sites as solid areas, the result was a nearly perfect representation of a mining tunnel system. The tunnel pattern was complex and extensive. It showed a main shaft with multiple lateral tunnels branching at regular intervals, extending beneath and beyond the town boundaries. The geometry was precise. Angles, spacing, and proportions consistent with planned excavation, not random natural voids or informal prospecting. Kowalski cross-referenced the pattern with historical mining records. No such tunnel system was documented in Southern Cross. The known mines were shallow surface operations. No deep shaft mining had been undertaken, primarily because the geology made it unfeasible. Below 200 feet, the rock was fractured and prone to collapse, and groundwater infiltration would have made tunneling extremely difficult with late 19th century technology. Yet the negative space pattern suggested exactly such a system existed or had been planned. She brought her findings to her supervisor, Dr. Thomas Vega. Together they examined the LiDAR data in detail. The pattern was undeniable. When the town's surface layout was inverted, it matched the configuration of a deep tunnel system extending to depths that would have been at or below the water table. Vega suggested the pattern might be coincidental, that the arrangement of streets happened to create a shape that resembled tunnel workings when inverted. Kowalski calculated the probability. Given the complexity and precision of the pattern, coincidence was extremely unlikely. They searched historical archives for any reference to planned deep mining at Southern Cross. They found fragmentary mentions in miners' journals and letters from the 1890s. One letter, written in 1894 by a miner named Patrick Sullivan to a business partner in Butte, included this passage: "The company has begun the deep work despite warnings from the engineers. They say the rock won't hold and the water will flood it within months. But the company insists the ore body extends below, and they mean to follow it." Another journal entry from 1896, written by a mine superintendent named Harold Morrison, noted, "The lower tunnels are abandoned now. They lasted barely 18 months before the seepage became unmanageable. 3 men were lost in the final collapse. The company has sealed the entries and forbidden further discussion." These accounts suggested deep tunneling had been attempted, but no official records documented such work. The Montana Bureau of Mines historical files contained no permits, surveys, or engineering reports for deep shaft operations at Southern Cross. If tunnels had been excavated, they were done informally, possibly secretly, and abandoned after failure. Kowalski and Vega attempted to verify whether subsurface voids existed. They reviewed geological survey data, historical seismic records, and groundwater studies. Nothing definitively confirmed or ruled out the presence of tunnels below Southern Cross. In September 2016, they visited the site with ground-penetrating radar equipment. The survey results were ambiguous. The equipment detected density variations and possible voids at depths ranging from 50 to 150 feet, but the fractured rock made interpretation difficult. The anomalies could be natural features, old mine workings, or artifacts of the geology. During their visit, they spoke with one of the few people who maintained a cabin near Southern Cross. Walter Mbeki, a retired geologist who had spent summers there since the 1980s, mentioned sinkholes. "They show up every few years," he said. "Not big ones, but noticeable. Ground just drops away in a spot where it was solid before. I've seen 3 of them since I started coming here." He showed Kowalski and Vega the locations. All 3 sinkholes were within the town boundaries. All 3 aligned with points on the negative space tunnel map, specifically where the pattern suggested tunnel intersections or shaft entries. Mbeki provided dates for the collapses. The first had occurred in 1999, the second in 2007, the third in 2015. Kowalski noted the intervals, 8 years, then 8 years. If the pattern continued, the next collapse would occur around 2023. She plotted the sinkhole locations on the LiDAR-derived map. They aligned with precision, too exact to be coincidental. Each sinkhole marked a point where the negative space pattern indicated a tunnel entrance or junction. If the pattern was real, it predicted where future collapses might occur. Local historians in Dillon had limited information about Southern Cross. Margaret Russo, curator of the Beaverhead County Museum, mentioned rumors she'd heard over the years. People who worked in the mines back in the day said there were tunnels that weren't on any maps, she explained. Bootleg operations, maybe, or company work they didn't want regulated. There were stories about men going down and not coming back up, collapses, floods, that kind of thing, but nothing official, just stories. Another resident, Linda Holloway, whose great-grandfather had been a mine foreman at Southern Cross in the 1890s, said her family had documents, letters, and a partial journal that mentioned the forbidden excavation. She allowed Kowalski to review them. The journal entries were fragmentary and cryptic, but they confirmed that deep tunneling had been attempted, that it had been dangerous, and that it had been deliberately concealed after failure. One entry from April 1897 read, "The company has ordered all maps destroyed and workers sworn to silence. The disaster below is not to be spoken of. The families were compensated quietly. The entry points have been filled and the surface rearranged to obscure what lies beneath." If the journal was accurate, the surface layout of Southern Cross, its streets and buildings, had been intentionally designed to hide the tunnel system below. When inverted, the surface plan revealed the subsurface truth. A complex of tunnels excavated in unstable rock, abandoned after collapse and flooding, concealed by rearranging the town above to erase evidence of what had been attempted. Kowalski and Vega prepared a report for the Montana Bureau of Mines. The report documented the LiDAR findings, the historical references, the sinkhole alignments, and the possibility that unstable subsurface voids existed beneath Southern Cross. They recommended ground stability assessment and public notification if the site was deemed hazardous. The Bureau acknowledged the report but took no action. A spokesperson stated that without definitive evidence of hazardous conditions, no resources were available for further investigation. The site was remote, largely uninhabited, and not subject to development pressure. The sinkholes, while noteworthy, were small and posed minimal public risk. A request to access the full historical archives of the mining companies that operated at Southern Cross was denied. The companies had long since dissolved, and their records, if they existed, were in private collections or lost. The Montana Historical Society had only fragmentary material, none of which included engineering documents or tunnel maps. In 2018, independent researcher Daniel Fierro, who studied historical mining operations, learned of Kowalski's findings and conducted his own analysis. He confirmed the negative space pattern and the sinkhole alignments. He also identified additional points on the map where the pattern suggested tunnel features. If the pattern was accurate, these points represented locations where future collapses might occur. Fierro calculated the stress distribution in the rock based on the presumed tunnel geometry and depth. His analysis suggested that if the tunnels existed and had been filled or partially collapsed, the remaining voids would be subject to progressive failure. Over time, groundwater infiltration and freeze-thaw cycles would weaken surrounding rock, leading to surface subsidence. The intervals between collapses, 8 years, matched the time frame his model predicted for stress redistribution after each failure event. If the pattern holds, Fierro wrote in a self-published analysis, the next collapse should occur between 2023 and 2025 at one of the locations predicted by the negative space map. After that, another collapse in 8 years, and so on, until the entire subsurface system has failed and the surface above reflects the void below. The 2023 window has passed. No new sinkhole has been reported at Southern Cross, but the site is visited infrequently, and small collapses could go unnoticed for months or years. The prediction remains testable, but unverified. The LiDAR data exists. The negative space pattern exists. The historical references exist. The sinkholes exist, aligned with impossible precision to a map that shows tunnels no one admits were built. And beneath Southern Cross, in fractured granite below the water table, something is failing. Slowly, predictably, following a pattern established over a century ago when men dug where they shouldn't have, concealed what they'd done, and left the surface to remember, in negative space, what was hidden below. The town streets spell out the tunnels in absence. Where buildings stood, voids exist. Where roads ran, rock remains. The map is inverted, but the truth is there, readable to anyone with the right technology and the willingness to see it. Every 8 years, the ground admits another piece of the secret, another sinkhole, another alignment with the pattern, another confirmation that beneath the surface, something was excavated, abandoned, and left to collapse in its own time. The next failure is coming. The pattern predicts it. The map shows where. And when it happens, the negative space will become a little less negative, the hidden a little less hidden, and the surface will sink another few feet closer to revealing what Southern Cross was built to conceal. The tunnels that shouldn't exist, the voids that remember. The pattern written in streets and buildings, readable only in reverse, true only in absence, waiting only for time and gravity to complete what was started in 1894 and has been failing piece by piece ever since.